One watching defeated enemies freeze with pure, genuine fear is always an incredible feeling. Right now, watching the arrogant king grovel and kneel on the cold floor. Staring blankly at nothing, anyone would feel an overwhelming wave of supreme dominance. By offering his crown to his conqueror, the former ruler was admitting his absolute defeat, begging for forgiveness for his ancestors' sins, and ready to yield everything. He offered his throne, his lands, his entire kingdom, the only thing he asked for was to keep his miserable life, but as everyone already knew, this war belonged to the vampires, powerful, bloodthirsty monsters who absolutely knew no mercy. At first, it honestly looked like the vampire lord was reaching out in peace. But only a complete fool who knew nothing about vampires would believe that. With one swift flick of his wrist, watch closely, he sends his enemy's head flying off. Seeing their king die so brutally, the helpless crowd realized their grim fate. Under the rule of these terrifying beasts, they would be treated worse than cattle. As the royal blood slowly drips from the claws of the vicious vampire, the court nobles panic in sheer terror, realizing this monster intends to slaughter them. Every last soul, leaving nothing behind but piles of headless corpses in the hall. The vampire king basks in his glorious victory, believing his reign will last forever. Meanwhile, the vanguard sent to hunt the surviving humans had almost finished their slaughter, leaving only a few survivors to finish off. Just as expected, this hunt is barely taking any time at all, leaving almost nobody left standing. Those still drawing breath are told not to fear the end, the survivors just have to accept their fate, since their suffering won't last much longer, but humans do not intend to die quietly, fighting back with everything to protect their loved ones. A mother holding her boys screams that this nightmare will end. Talk about devastating. She claims a god appeared in her dreams to deliver a message of hope. Even though her voice trembles with deep despair, she proudly announces the prophecy. A savior is coming soon to liberate mankind from this dark reign of blood. But one of the vampires just sneers, mocking her hope with absolute contempt. Even if a savior comes, he claims, no humans will be left to see it. With that, the beasts lunged forward with unbelievable speed, sending panic through the crowd. The adults try to shield the children, their last hope to continue the fight. But the vampires are far too fast and agile, giving humanity no real chance. Yet even against this terrifying strength, the human warriors refuse to back down. They choose to die on their feet, facing their killers with unmatched dignity. They face death with pride, standing as equals to their executioners, but seeing the wild, bloodshot eyes of the vampires as they slaughter is deeply unsettling. There is no time to process the horror before another brave defender falls. The monsters are actually growing quite annoyed that these stubborn humans keep fighting back. Instead of just giving up and dying quietly like they are supposed to, they want to slaughter these annoying pests and drain every single drop of blood, even if the hunt is occasionally amusing when they run into strong warriors. But no matter how skilled the humans are, they can never match the raw, overwhelming might of the vampire race, who can easily shatter their legendary weapons with a mere snap of their fingers, turning the entire battlefield into a bloodbath. Fountains of blood and guts. Watching it had become so normal it was boring. Unbearably tedious, in fact. Seeing the kids weep was just a big joke. Monsters laughed as the little ones tried to hide behind their trembling mother. They had just been told they would be hurt. They thought mommy could save them. But they had no idea everyone in this forest was already marked for death. Every single soul, including the very woman who gave them life. A vampire raised his sword, ready to split the mother's head open. Then he froze. A bizarre, cold energy was creeping up behind him. Looking back, they saw a massive knight approaching. His armor gleamed brightly. This huge stranger towered over every single human they had slaughtered today. The scale of this guy is insane. The monsters immediately panicked. They realized this slow-stepping knight was definitely not a normal human. His energy was far too bizarre, trusting their instincts they knew. They were looking at a corpse, except this corpse seemed way too active. As crazy as it sounded, the dead warrior was moving incredibly fast. He had serious strength. The vicious bloodsuckers were furious that he dared lunge. They couldn't believe this metal scarecrow actually had the guts to fight. But when the stranger easily blocked their attack, they gasped in shock. Next, the dead knight swung. The counterattack was swift and brutal. The impact sent one of those smug beasts sailing backward. For the first time ever, the vampire felt pure terror. He stared at the footprints pressed deep into the muddy ground. That single jump was at least 10 meters. It made no sense. The giant's sheer physical strength was absolutely off the charts. He easily pinned the monster to the earth, freezing him in place. Then he casually tore the beast apart, scattering his limbs everywhere. The last vampire realized he had to end this fight immediately. This knight was too dangerous. He needed a fast, surprise strike. He lunged forward with everything, but the attack was a total failure. The massive knight barely even flinched as the blade hit. His enemy's sword dug straight into his chest armor, yet he stood tall. The vampire panicked. Why wasn't this guy trying to dodge at all? He gnashed his teeth in fury. His enemy should be dead. After all, he had run him straight through the heart. Talk about a bad day to be a vampire, the knight answers instantly. A heavy iron grip clamped hard around the monster's face. He effortlessly lifted the blood-sucking creature high into the air. The creature could only kick its legs helplessly in panic. Pure primal terror filled its eyes. This was the end. It was being killed by a corpse with a sword in its chest. Nature itself seemed eager to wipe this abomination off the earth. The wind instantly scattered whatever dust remained of his broken body. Survivors stood frozen in place, staring in absolute shock at the scene. Right then, the mother realized they were looking at a legend. The legendary hero from her dreams. The knight slowly turned. The knight looks down at the woman, asking if she and the kids are the only survivors. Seeing she is too shocked to speak, he decides to give her directions. He tells her that the Holy Land is just 5 kilometers away if they want to live. They need to head there now, but the survivors just stare, calling him their savior. They claim the dream hero is right here, which only sparks his sudden anger. Cold fury washes over him, and he does something completely unexpected. He slowly reaches up to remove his helmet while everyone watches in tense silence. Underneath is a face ruined by war, completely covered in horrific, jagged scars. His skin is torn apart, and one of his eyes is completely useless and glazed over. He chuckles softly, asking the terrified group if this is what a savior looks like. The sight is absolutely terrifying, and the survivors instinctively scramble backward to get away. Then his prosthetic nose detaches, dropping straight onto the dirty ground with a dull thud. That definitely ruins any fairy tale hero image. Smiling, the scarred knight bends down. He grabs his fallen nose, while the petrified onlookers track his every single movement. The moment he locks his gaze back onto them, the crowd panics completely. They shriek in absolute terror, screaming that a hideous monster is standing right before them. This is not the first time he has been called a monster. He just laughs, in this bleak world choked by endless, suffocating darkness. A bizarre rumor has been spreading through the shadows, passed around in hushed whispers. They whisper it quietly in the dark, so the wrong ears never find out. It is the legend of a mysterious figure who single-handedly slaughtered the vampires. Myths claim this heavily armored, ghostly warrior can never truly be killed. Recently, a group of scavengers wearing plague masks went searching through the ruins. Deep in the crumbling city, they stumbled upon something completely unexpected. What lay before them was both incredibly terrifying and absolutely magnificent to behold. The warrior had died on his feet, still gripping his massive sword with iron strength. This fallen soldier was Gunther, and the masked travelers recognized him instantly. He was once celebrated as the absolute greatest, most unstoppable gladiator of their age, surviving 228 brutal gladiatorial battles with a flawless, undefeated record. Even a legend like him could not survive the vampire. A masked man asks Ariel if they should really risk their entire future on a dead guy they do not even know. Ariel answers with complete confidence, stating that she trusts Gunther completely. His body is perfectly preserved, meaning their desperate, insane plan might actually work. Pulling off her plague mask, Ariel stares down at the fallen champion of humanity. Looking straight into his cold, lifeless eyes, she whispers her desperate plea. When absolute darkness swallows the world, only a true savior can bring back hope. But reality is incredibly cruel, forcing good people to endure things no one ever should. Those who wanted a peaceful existence are dragged into committing terrible, bloody deeds. Gunther was just another victim of this broken world, forced to do the dirty work. Yet he survived against all odds, performing the impossible to stay alive. It seems fate is not done with him yet, refusing to let him rest in peace. Suddenly his corpse snaps its eyes wide open, sending shockwaves through the room. Masked cultists cheer in absolute triumph, but Gunther does not share their excitement. He is completely terrified, knowing with absolute certainty that his life had already ended. They quickly explain the crazy truth. He has been resurrected to save mankind from doom. Cruel vampire oppression. The undead warrior's single eye now suddenly widens as he finally realizes everything. That they actually dragged his body back from the very edge of death. His first and most immediate demand is a mirror. He must see his own face right now. Staring at his new body, he is now left completely speechless. A monster stares back. It is a broken corpse doll, literally stitched together piece by piece. Ariel quickly objects, strongly denying that he is a monster. Instead, she passionately insists that he alone now represents the absolute last hope for all of mankind. She explains that Gunther's brain contains a life support device. Her scientist coworker steps in, explaining that as long as this system still works, he cannot die. True death is completely impossible, even if his entire body is blown up and his severed limbs scatter around. Pointing at those severed limbs, Ariel eagerly promises to rebuild him. She states that his body will be heavily upgraded with custom-engineered muscle tissue. These special custom muscles will generate dozens of times more energy than any normal living human. With this raw strength, he can fight vampires head-on. Gunther listens in total amazement, his single eye widening as they finally give him the news. There is a chance he will become stronger than any vampire. It is obvious now, they resurrected his corpse just to craft the ultimate savior to fight their bloody war. They quickly state that no other warrior could possibly replace him. He is their absolute perfect candidate. Now, they are demanding that he do only one single thing. The hero must fight for humanity so they can escape this endless vampire nightmare. Becoming a savior of humanity sounds wonderful. However, this legendary undead warrior has his own plan. He has one condition. This immediately worries the gathered scientists. They are not happy about this sudden turn of events, but they reluctantly agree to listen. As Rene steps too close, Gunther suddenly grabs him tightly by the head. Using his powerful leg stumps, he squeezes with terrifying strength. Yeah, he is not messing around. He will not be dictated to, demanding they put him down right now. He demands immediate release. Horrified, Ariel quickly rushes over now to help her terrified colleague, Rene. She begs him to let Rene go, but the warrior refuses. Instead, he calmly asks if she knows what it actually takes to become the strongest soldier. Without waiting, he mutters that one must kill people without blinking. To Gunther, the vampires are indeed a horrific plague, but humans themselves are not exactly innocent at all. Humans are incredibly selfish. He feels absolutely no pity for them. He won't fight for them. Gunther is actually amused that they ever thought they could use him. Only one life matters to him, and that is his own. Everyone else is completely meaningless to him. He demands they attach his limbs and set him free right now. They must release him immediately, or he will end Rene's life. This is no bluff. Poor Rene groans in agony now as the warrior's grip tightens even further. His face is pale, and the veins on his forehead bulge. Ariel realizes they made a massive, fatal mistake with him. They assumed they could easily control this undead beast without ever asking what he actually wanted. She nervously holds her pocket watch, drawing a chuckle from him. He mockingly asks if she is checking the time left before Rene draws his last breath. Ariel calmly stares back at the warrior, who is holding her friend hostage. She quietly points out that he is actually the one who is running out of time. Gunther has absolutely no idea what she means until she reveals the truth. Just 4 seconds left, then Gunther's entire world bled into a horrific crimson. They say the dead feel no pain, but that turned out to be a flat-out lie. His heavy body went completely limp. Rene finally wrenched his head free from that iron grip. As the giant warrior's eyelids fluttered shut, a fading spark of consciousness remained inside him. He could still hear his captors shouting in sheer terror about how incredibly dangerous he was. Gunther woke up screaming, praying it was all just a bad dream. But reality crashed back down when he realized his grim situation had not changed. He was still suspended in a bizarre laboratory, dangling by the bloody stumps of his limbs. Rene dragged him back to the moment, rubbing his bruised jaw and groaning in pain. Complaining that even thinking hurt, Rene watched as Gunther demanded to know what was happening. The scientist offered no real answers. His cryptic words explained absolutely nothing. He simply muttered that beasts and machines both require a recharge. Pointing behind the warrior, Rene revealed that Gunther was now linked directly to Ariel. They were joined by a thick, glowing wire, feeding off another person's very life force. Gunther stared blankly. He struggled to comprehend this bizarre nightmare. These strange, clinical terms about siphoning human life force made zero sense to him. Ariel spoke up, explaining the cold, hard truth in simple terms. Gunther had to stay hooked to her machine to absorb her life energy. This strange energy infusion was the only thing keeping him moving and active. Unhooked, he had exactly 2 hours, then he would drop dead again. Gunther roared in protest, furious at the incredibly small window of survival he had. Rene shook his head, admitting that such a volatile reaction was completely expected. Still, they desperately needed the warrior to trust that this was all to save humanity. Those modified to share their vital energy like this were known as energy workers. Out of hundreds of brave volunteers, only Ariel survived. She was special. Rene explained that developing this delicate technology was nearly impossible under current conditions. She was their sole power source, meaning Gunther had to reconsider his selfish attitude. If he decided to only fight for himself, he would not last very long. Without Ariel, his clock runs down in 2 hours, making any solo rampage pointless. His only real choice was to fight vampires to protect his beautiful, living battery. He was trapped. This heavy, impossible realization absolutely crushed his spirit. Talk about a total nightmare choice. Absolutely anyone would be completely lost here. A sudden panic shout shattered the heavy silence, calling urgently for Captain Rene. They had a critical, unexpected problem, but the captain snapped back in anger. He ordered them to leave, screaming that their vital work was in full swing. His harsh warning did nothing to stop a terrified soldier from bursting inside. Glaring at Gunther, the breathless messenger gasped that the snake had finally found them. Before another word left his lips, a shadow ripped through him, instantly. The masked soldier fell dead instantly, silenced by cruel, mocking laughter from the darkness. The killers sneered that Benzel Nim wanted every single valuable and survivor brought back. These vicious vampires had clearly received a tip about this secret, populated hideout. They were eager to slaughter everyone in the most horrific way they could imagine. Pure dread filled the room. Everyone stared at the bloodthirsty intruders. No one knew what to do, except perhaps for Gunther. After all, he was technically already dead, so what did he have to lose? Actually, the undead warrior is the first to wake up. He demands his limbs. Reattached immediately. That is the only way to keep them all alive, so Captain Rene orders his soldiers to buy some time. They must put Gunther back together. But the men instantly refuse. They complain they are terrible fighters who will definitely die in a suicidal charge. They tell their captain to go instead since he used to be a skilled hunter. This makes Rene snap in pure anger, asking who will lead them if he dies. He commands them to obey immediately. No more arguments. Still, the terrified soldiers refuse to march to their graves, desperately arguing that 4 weak men stand absolutely zero chance out there. Hearing their endless excuses, Ariel realizes she must step up, now. She realizes no one else will. Ariel grabs her trusty crossbow, promising to hold the line. While they work, they watch in absolute shock. Ariel charges straight toward the bloodthirsty vampires without a single trace of fear. Gunther is absolutely terrified, knowing his only living battery could get slaughtered right now. Yet, when Ariel faces her monstrous opponents, cold dread washes over her. They are incredibly grotesque. The disgusting beasts burst out laughing. They mock her for being a tiny little girl who apparently has a death wish, wandering out here alone. Tuning out their petty insults, Ariel fires her first bolt, dead on. But the lead vampire snatches the projectile right out of the air, stopping. It inches from his skull. Ariel does not flinch. She simply loads another bolt into her weapon, calmly calling her opponent a creepy, chatty nuisance. The vampire seethes with pure rage, snapping her arrow with a single hand, before promising to torture her slowly, so she suffers every single second before dying. Even with his insane speed, Ariel keeps firing bolt after bolt, remaining hyper-focused. From the outside, it seems this fragile girl is completely fearless. She faces vampires who are infinitely more powerful than any regular human. Luckily for the beast, his reflexes allow him to barely evade every incoming shot. Suddenly, the creature closes the distance so fast that her next shot feels like a guaranteed hit. Sadly, that is not what happens. The bloodsucker slips past the arrow, executing a brutal counterattack. With his frightening speed, he easily bridges the gap and slams into Ariel. His claws wrap around her neck. He He cuts off her breath instantly. He squeezes hard. It seems he will shatter her windpipe in a second. The beast grins, sneering that Lord Benzel would love her pretty face. So he might actually leave it intact. Just then, his partner rushes over, eager to claim this highly attractive prize for his own collection. But the first vampire snarls, telling him to back off. The two monsters start bickering like children over who gets to keep the loot. Their loud arguing completely masks the approach of an incredibly massive threat. Out of nowhere, an explosive force strikes them, absolute fury. The impact sends both vampires flying, unable to even react in time. Naturally, it is Gunther. He smiles as the beasts crash into the stone wall with a thunderous impact, but then the warrior freezes. He spots Ariel staring at him, the girl he literally cannot live without. Gunther wraps his massive palm around Ari's face, asking if she's completely lost her mind going there alone. Where certain death is literally waiting, Ari snaps back, arguing that someone must stall those vampires to buy precious time while the others retrieve him. Before Gunther can even answer, he suddenly hears that their enemies have already recovered, already back to bickering over who gets to claim the final prize. Even after slamming hard into the wall, those bloodsuckers are still visibly shaken up, losing that signature speed and insane agility of theirs. Though one monster's head is practically dangling off his shoulders, he is still moving far from dead. Ari points out the harsh truth. If they want to stop their insane regeneration, they must crush the heart. Shoving the girl aside, Gunther decides it is finally time to finish off these annoying bloodsuckers who refuse to leave the world of the living, but things get complicated. He is currently facing down two opponents. The battle-hardened warrior is not worried about his own safety. You cannot die twice, but he definitely fears for his vital energy source, Ari. Yet that worry doesn't paralyze him, it only forces him to move even faster. In a flash, he grabs one vampire, trapping him in a bone-crushing grip. The beast instantly tries his usual trick, aiming to plunge his hand deep inside the chest and rip the beating heart right out, but when his claws fail to break Gunther's skin, the monster freezes in utter shock, completely baffled by what sort of entity stands before him, but his fragile physical frame is already shattering under Gunther's raw, overwhelming strength. Seeing this absolute slaughter of his comrade, the second vampire flees in sheer terror, not that it will save him. While Gunther is distracted crushing the first, the coward tries to snatch Ari, who is totally defenseless. He never expected the warrior to finish his partner off, leaving Gunther plenty of time to hunt him down. Ari and Rene watch the massacre with their mouths wide open, and honestly, can you blame them? Despite using this new physical shell for the first time, Gunther fights like a seasoned god. Staring at him, Ari realizes this goes way beyond mere talent. His modified body is vastly superior to any vampire, with speed a normal human cannot even fathom. It is clear that Gunther has already fully realized his newfound potential. After all, he wields this power with master precision, though he still needs to guard his heart closely. It slightly startles Ari when she realizes that the man is genuinely enjoying the thrill of combat. Snatching up the last survivor, Gunther decides this pathetic parasite is the perfect punching bag. The broken creature can barely even breathe, yet he wheezes out that humanity has birthed a terrifying monster. Grinning wildly, Gunther asks if those are his pathetic final words, because if so, they are incredibly weak. As the warrior raises his arm for the final strike, the vampire desperately begs for just 1 minute of mercy before being sent to hell. Those terrified beasts quickly babble about an enticing deal that will benefit him. To please him, and trust me, Gunther is actually intrigued, the desperate pleading in the monster's voice makes him pause mid-swing. He demands to know what the offer is and why he should care. The gasping vampire explains that he can feel Benzel Nim's presence nearby, and they share the exact same blood. Killing them now will only trigger a rapid and blood-curdling wave of vengeance. If that bloodsucker was to be believed, Gunther wouldn't last 2 minutes, except he just couldn't understand why someone so powerful would want to avenge trash like them. The vampire snarled that there was only one reason. This mysterious Benzel loved them deeply. The beast then made a promise. He would leave everyone else alone, as long as they surrendered the girl. Gunther looked back at Ariel, knowing he would never hand over his life source. The only trade he offered was to let them take the bald Rene, but nobody wanted the guy. He completely lacked any sort of charm, so The warrior decided to offer his opponent something far more direct, a single, devastating punch that ripped straight through the monster, ending any further conversation. Negotiations were officially over. This bloody style was exactly how Gunther liked it. There was absolutely no issue dealing with the second vampire either, especially since the creature was already terrified after seeing his partner die. Gunther finished him off quickly, but if their threats were actually real, they would soon have to face a dangerous figure named Benzel Nim. Gunther turned to Ariel, asking why this Benzel guy was so feared. The girl revealed that they were dealing with an elite, high-class vampire. Ariel broke it down, explaining that there were 3 types of vampires. The first type were born as vampires, known as pure bloods. These high-ranking nobles held the purest blood, commanding ultimate respect from everyone. Below them were the low rankers, born from the blood of those elites. These dark-haired commoners were considered completely inferior, serving as the bottom tier. High-ranking ones were extremely rare because they were highly vulnerable to sunlight. Instead, they used their own blood to craft unique, powerful weapons. Rumor had it their strength was completely insane, defying all common sense. Their conversation was cut short by Rene, who was visibly shaking with fear. Hearing that Benzel was coming soon had the man absolutely losing his mind. Gunther found his panic strange, but Rene insisted they had to prepare. First, though, the bald man demanded a straight answer from Gunther. He needed to know if the warrior was actually willing to protect humanity. Gunther hadn't committed yet, leaving them hanging. After a quiet moment, the hero admitted that his own survival was still his top priority. Yet to keep living, it seemed he had no choice but to help. So cooperating with the humans who resurrected him was the best move. Ariel bowed her head deeply, filled with intense relief and deep gratitude. She promised that humanity would never forget the warrior's crucial decision. Ignoring her thanks, Gunther simply demanded to be fully recharged first. Ariel smiled and wanted to present a small gift before doing so. It was a custom suit of armor designed to shield his entire body. The heavy plating perfectly hid the crude stitching where his limbs were attached. Seeing the armored warrior, Rene was ecstatic. Talk about a legendary upgrade. He looked like an angel of vengeance, ready to purge the vampire plague. Rene proudly explained he crafted the suit by combining several different gear pieces. The final result made Gunther look like he had literally risen from the dead. Staring at his reflection, the warrior felt like some heroic myth brought to life. But our guy clearly lacks their level of selflessness, grabbing his hand. Ariel explains with excitement that this ring armor is crafted from pure mithril, and she reinforced every single layer to keep his movements fluid and fast. The young girl is certain that Gunther now outmatches those bloodsuckers. Because they cannot match his speed anymore, plus the suit blocks heavy damage. But there is a catch. She gently tells him to check his wrists. Looking closely at his skin, he spots a very thin red line running along his wrist. That mark displays how much active time he has left. After unplugging from the Energizer, slowly shrinking as the clock ticks, he must constantly watch it, remembering he only has a tight window of exactly 2 hours before his mind and body completely shut down. Shaking off the grim thought, he simply enjoys the warm energy filling him. But the peaceful moment instantly shatters when an eerie sound echoes nearby. Putting everyone on high alert, they all look up toward the ceiling, knowing that the threat is looming right over their heads outside. Then massive, heavy impacts begin to slam against the ceiling with insane force. At first, he thinks it might just be falling debris, but it is worse. The heavy pounding above gets louder and faster by the second. Rene panics, not understanding why their enemies found them this quickly. They were promised at least an hour of safety, yet it has barely been 40 minutes. Sensing the danger, Gunther knows he must make a move. He barks out an order to cut his connection right now. He demands to know which way to escape, but Ariel drops a bombshell. Since they rebuilt this underground tomb, there is only one single way in and out. This little detail does not sit well with our warrior at all. He really wishes they mentioned this major setback earlier. Snapping his helmet shut, he commands the group to back off. He wants them to stay clear and let him handle this, leaving Rene praying for a miracle, but the undead knight has never felt so incredibly powerful. Now they just have to wait for the mysterious boss of those vampires. Suddenly, the heavy door begins to slowly creak open with a loud screech. The intruders are taking their sweet time, enjoying the tense buildup. A moment later, three figures step forward into the dim light. Their glowing red eyes pierce the dark, but Gunther remains entirely unfazed. Honestly, they expected someone a lot more imposing than this trio. The vampires smirk, declaring they finally found the pest who slaughtered their kin. Gunther just sneers. Are they referring to those weaklings? If so, he proudly admits to wiping them out without a second thought. Surprisingly, one of the intruders agrees that those relatives were completely pathetic. He even compliments the undead gladiator on showing pretty decent combat skills. Apparently, those dead weaklings were hated by their own family for being so ugly. They were just desperate losers begging for some attention. The elegant vampire politely apologizes for bringing up such trash. Hearing this cool, calm speech gives Gunther a very uneasy feeling. He knows these monsters are totally fake, but he remains highly alert. No one knew quite what to say. Rene, though, seemed to understand things a bit better. He figured out what was happening, asking if the face collector before them was indeed one. Of Benzel's minions, the abomination quickly confirmed it, causing the young man to frown. He apologized for killing those other monsters, explaining it was only because they attacked first. Surprisingly, this grotesque face collector actually seemed willing to sit there and listen. Seeing a chance, Rene made sure to make their peaceful intentions loud and clear. He wanted total peace, no useless fighting, just walking their separate ways. For a brief second, it honestly looked like the vampires liked the sound of that. They nodded in satisfaction, muttering about how the morning sun would be rising soon anyway. But hesitation quickly crept back over them. They had made a strict promise to Julius. They swore they would never let their own kind be slaughtered so easily without consequences. So they came up with what they considered the most logical, perfect solution, which was to wipe out every single human on Earth. Honestly, that response was pretty expected. It was completely foolish to hope these beasts would show any mercy. Hoping they would show mercy, pure delusion, but Gunther had other plans. He knew they could not handle him. Hearing this, the monsters laughed. To them, it seemed like the absolute funniest joke they had ever heard. Then more heads emerged, dozens of them writhing in the dark. One snarled, explaining the only reason lesser vampires are active day and night. They merely serve as shields, cannon fodder for the true elite. Those elites are vulnerable to daylight, but if the blinding sun did not exist, and burn their sensitive skin, absolutely no one on Earth could defeat them. Staring at the hundreds of writhing vampire heads, Gunther realized something. Their arrogant claim would actually be true if he was not standing here. But humanity had engineered a soldier who was completely impossible to kill. Still, this was the absolute first time Gunther had faced such an abomination. Honestly, he could barely process it, a vampire made of faces. Or multiple vampires fused together, who knows, and he was not alone in his shock. Ariel was staring in absolute disbelief, unable to even comprehend what stood before them. The creature looked like a massive cluster of severed heads bound by thick blood. They moved together as a single, sickening organism. Rene finally spoke up. He muttered that this horrific sight was exactly why they called it the face collector. Ariel was the first to snap out of it. She locked in. She knew she had to locate the beast's core and destroy it immediately. But finding a single heart in that chaotic, thrashing pile was nearly impossible. Each head bared rows of razor-sharp teeth, then they suddenly struck. The blow was blindingly fast, carrying an absolute bone-crushing force. Ariel squeezed her eyes shut, fully prepared for this to be the end. She would never see the sunlight again, that blessing they so despised. But Gunther moved like a flash, scooping her up into his arms. He leaped backward, whisking her away from those snapping, bloodthirsty teeth. These things were way faster and more massive than he had anticipated. He yelled at her to run and find cover immediately, but she flatly refused. She argued that without finding its weak spot, fighting was totally pointless. Gunther grimaced, telling her he already had a solid plan to handle it. He insisted she did not need to worry about him, telling her to stay safe. In that split second, Ariel caught a flicker of actual concern in his gruff, lifeless voice. She was stunned, but quickly brushed it off as nothing more than her imagination. Meanwhile, the creature crept toward one of Rene's terrified soldiers, who was too frozen with fear to even run, catching the scent of fresh blood mixed with raw panic and adrenaline. The face collector inhaled deeply. Pure ecstasy, the beast was absolutely thrilled by the chance to rip apart a new victim and satisfy its endless hunger for a moment. The helpless soldier braced himself, completely accepting his grim end, and waited for the agony of tearing fangs, but nothing happened even as he squeezed his eyes shut. Gunther stepped in once more, blocking the attack. No free meals on his watch. This highly annoyed and confused the monster, who was fully ready for an easy slaughter before being stopped. Gunther retaliated immediately, unleashing a barrage of heavy blows that stunned the creature. It never expected anyone to strike back so aggressively. His strategy was simple. If he could not locate its main body, he would just smash every single head instead. Rene and his crew watched the brutal clash. In absolute awe, still, Rene could not believe Gunther was strong enough to challenge a high-ranking vampire. The face collector itself shared that exact arrogance, viewing itself as a godlike entity. Too bad Gunther was about to shatter that delusion completely. When the monster felt the sheer weight of the warrior's true strength, it realized no ordinary human could ever possess this kind of power. Pure terror flickered in its crimson eyes as the beast asked if its enemy was actually human, but Gunther had zero interest in making small talk. Instead, he casually asked why that even mattered. His cold reply was backed by a heavy strike that ripped right through the swarm of heads. A small opening cleared, and without a moment of hesitation, Gunther thrust his hand inside, aiming for the core, but the multiple heads gleefully clamped down, sinking their sharp fangs deep into his exposed arm. They believed they had won, having never faced anyone who could withstand their overwhelming venom. Laughing hysterically, the swarm of vicious heads shrieked that the warrior was trapped and would soon perish right there. They promised to drain every single drop of his blood. Their threats did absolutely nothing to shake his resolve. He forcefully yanked his arm back, tearing several heads clean off the swarm in a display of raw strength. Yet some severed jaws still clung to his flesh with an iron grip. They refused to let go as even more heads swarmed forward to surround the warrior, pinning his limbs to his sides. The sheer numbers began to weigh him down. Now, even this immortal fighter felt a chill of genuine dread, remembering that some fates are worse than death itself. The monster's hissed promises of endless torment before his final consumption. Scores of biting mouths clamped down on him, dragging him down and holding him completely still. Darkness slowly closed in on him. In the cold dark, long-buried memories of ancient legends began to surface. Buried deep in a mountain of rotting trash, a dark discovery waited, a place where no human would dare to step amid the thick filth. Lay a tiny newborn baby, choking on tears. The infant wept. He wept, aching for the warmth of the mother who abandoned him. Nobody heard his desperate cries. He lay in that rot for days until everything suddenly shifted. Dead silence. The crying stopped completely. Not a single peep. Anyone hoping to rescue him would have to find the child lying eerily quiet, left entirely alone without help or love. That child was Gunther, just Gunther, a man used to fighting for every breath alone. He had always relied only on himself, making this brutal despair feel oddly familiar. He knew survival demanded just one thing. He had to find a way to escape the crushing jaws and sharp teeth of this horrific beast as fast as possible. The bite was incredibly powerful. Gunther quickly realized that although knocking out one or two of these heads was realistic, freeing his body from the grip of a dozen snapping jaws was pretty much impossible. Still, his limbs were entirely pinned down under the swarm, leaving him completely immobilized, stuck. Thinking of a way out, he figured he had to keep direct contact with these creatures to an absolute minimum. Touching the floor or applying force was too dangerous, maybe climbing out through the bottom. But he had no clue how many more layers of heads were waiting down there. Too risky. As if reading his mind, the twisted vampires began to laugh evilly, telling him he can absolutely never escape. Moments later, another head emerged from the deep shadows, calling out to a warrior. This is getting crazy. She wanted to finish this night fast, desperately wanting to end the night quickly and taste his warm blood on her parched lips. Gunther noticed this shift immediately, knowing it meant absolute trouble. Soon, more and more unique heads started to appear all around. This was incredibly strange, since they had all looked completely identical before. Now one face looked deeply uncomfortable, like an unwilling captive forced into this grotesque nightmare. Suddenly, a raspy voice speaks up, revealing that this head belongs to Albert Lurin. He was once a celebrated hero, fighting vampires to protect humanity, but now he is just another trophy in the monster's collection. The monster highly treasures him, keeping his hair intact and his features completely undamaged. Finally, the true mastermind running this nightmare steps out of the shadows. She proudly boasts that only the most magnificent and beautiful faces of fallen warriors are gathered in this place. Their trapped souls are cursed to rot here, never aging or fading. Until the very end of time, she proudly brags about creating a flawless hell for her victims where they desperately beg for death but cannot die. Hearing this long monologue, Gunther merely smirks, telling the monster his scarred face is not going to suit her twisted tastes. He tells her not to worry. He says, but she only sneers back. She believes this warrior has already earned his spot after showing such magnificent willpower. To her, he is a priceless, unique exhibit. Realizing his words are doing nothing, the warrior decides to remind her once more that his ugly, scarred face is definitely not her type. The monster who valued a beautiful shell, this time, those words actually made the creature think. He grew furious, demanding if this human really believed some cheap talk would save him. But Gunther just smirked, telling the beast to test those words himself. The monster immediately ordered one of his heads to yank off the prisoner's helmet. Once the vampire heads saw what lay underneath, their jaws dropped in absolute shock. Right before them stood a creature that looked completely different from what they expected. Gunther smirked, saying a handsome guy like him simply did not belong here. Having him around would only ruin the overall look of the monster's trophy room. The monster just burst out laughing, finding his captive's supreme confidence hilarious. He could not believe this doomed prey actually thought he stood a chance of escaping. Especially given this situation, but Gunther's gaze was dead serious. He locked eyes with the beast, claiming he could easily escape with just a tiny favor. Then a wild, crooked smile split his face as he whispered a chilling warning. Vampires are not the only creatures around here with sharp teeth that can bite. With that, he lunged forward, literally biting and chewing his way through the flesh. This insane move left the giant beast completely stunned and in total disbelief. He never expected anyone to try such a bizarre and desperate stunt. Believing it was useless, the monster roared, claiming nobody could ever outsmart him. He screamed that no prisoner had ever managed to break free from his grasp. Too bad for him, he had never faced a wild card like Gunther before. A man so stubborn, strong, and most importantly, immortal. Ripping a vampire head apart with his teeth, Gunther declared he was still alive. Despite all their bizarre powers, he was still the one standing. The massive creature could only stare in horror, watching his wild, frantic struggle. Remaining heads watched the human in awe, utterly fascinated by his sheer resistance. They had never seen anyone fight back with such savage, relentless fury. Watching from a distance, Rene and Ariel looked on with pure dread. Seeing so many vampire heads swarming their hero, they doubted he would survive. The masked man panicked, fearing this was the end of their hope for freedom. But Rene refused to believe their journey would end in such a miserable way. He knew their creation was unlike any other fighter. Still, he deeply regretted dragging them into this cursed, hyper-dangerous nest. Their invincible knight might actually end up as a lifeless corpse here. Only Ariel held on to hope, stubbornly believing their hero would somehow pull through. And pretty soon, the first signs of a miracle began to show. She pointed ahead to where vampire heads suddenly started tumbling out one by one. With every passing second, more severed heads rained down as the barrier weakened. A sudden explosion of movement followed, like someone tearing the trap wide open. Unbelievably, Gunther had managed to break completely free from the monster's iron grip. Now he was diving downward, dragging a couple of screeching vampire heads with him. Shocked, Rene cheered out loud, claiming he always believed in their dark knight, completely ignoring the fact that just 3 minutes ago, he was crying in despair. Landing hard on the stone floor, our hero finally breathed a sigh of relief. But there was absolutely no time to rest. Through the massive hole he had just carved in the monster's body, dozens of vampire heads rained down, but Gunther was totally ready to jump back in time, but there was a catch. Rene noticed that the legs were missing from his avatar. A sacrifice had to be made, but now our hero realized it was absolutely necessary to change his strategy because in close combat this enemy could not be beaten. This was something Rene had honestly never thought about, since he had not actually considered the possibility of having to fight in the first place. Seeing Gunther heavily mangled, he realized that they would likely be completely devoured. The first thing the warrior did was rush over to the one who was his absolute source of life energy, pulling Ariel tightly against him. He resolved to protect her, no matter what. Being a hero only sounds great in fairy tales, but reality was brutal, and Gunther knew it. Knew they did not stand a single chance. He insisted they had to get out of this place before the sun set. It was crazy how fast this newcomer took the reins, no waiting. The vampires lunged, snapping their deadly jaws greedily. An avalanche of heads crashed down on this place where departed souls once found eternal rest. Gunther dragged his legless body, which Ariel was holding onto, leaping as far from the danger as possible. It was insanely hard for him to move, which made perfect sense given his circumstances. Staring at her savior, Ariel realized how to help, soon after she told him she had upgraded crutches ready, but they were not finished yet, but with enough effort they could reach the weapons. Gunther cut her off. No time, they had to move. Immediately, he ordered Ariel to grab hold of him as tightly as possible. She quickly complied, wrapping her arms around him. The warrior felt her hold locked tight and immediately sprinted away at full speed. Escape immediately. The vampire heads viciously watched their every move, as if already tasting the sweet human blood on their lips. Glancing back, Ariel checked to see how close they were. When the monsters saw her face, they froze in their tracks. They stopped. That beautiful face had to be part of their collection. Into their collection, these monsters would do absolutely anything to make it happen, so they accelerated, shrieking for her to surrender her face. Every head craved her looks. They wanted to sink fangs into her warm, living flesh with their sharp teeth. Rolling his eyes, Gunther dryly remarked that she was quite a hit with these bloodsuckers. He even joked about getting jealous. Shifting back to business, he asked how much time remained before sunrise. Ariel replied that based on yesterday, they had about 5 minutes left. Scouting ahead, Gunther noticed an empty doorway. Perfect. He decided to hide there and wait, but his thoughts were shattered by a loud laugh echoing right next to them. Terrified screams followed. Someone was trapped by the monster and begging for their life. That poor soul was none other than Rene. He had the absolute worst luck in this situation. Gunther knew abandoning him was wrong, but he was likely already bitten. Leaving him was a forced sacrifice, bait to let them escape. But seeing the deep sadness on the face of Ariel, Gunther asked if she realized that she had to sacrifice something for the future of humanity, but her stubborn look made it clear she had her own opinion, and it was completely different from what Gunther had suggested. The knight realized that if he did not intervene immediately, she was going to do something totally reckless. Right then, she leaped out of hiding and waved her arms while screaming, instantly drawing the gaze of Benzel, a monster that was eager to devour them both. Fuming with rage, Gunther realized he was ready to throttle her because she had endangered not only her own life, but his. He just could not believe she had actually walked out into the very center of the hall, waiting for thousands of beasts to approach her just to draw their attention away from Rene. In the last second, he grabbed her and prevented the creatures from ripping her apart. Landing on the ground, he began to lecture her, reminding her he had told her to stay out, but Ariel protested, arguing that if there was even a tiny chance to save the captain, they had to take it. Now it was clear they would have to fight through these monsters instead of leaving quietly like Gunther wanted. There was only one hope: the open doors. If they reached them before the vampires did, they had a chance of survival. Jumping high to avoid being caught in the jaws of their enemy was incredibly difficult, but our knight was no weakling. Suddenly his body was so close to the fangs of the bloodsuckers that they opened their mouths wide, craving the taste of warm blood on their tongues, but all they caught was a small piece of cloth torn from Gunther's dark robes. They made it. The pair actually managed to fly through the open door and escape that deadly chamber without wasting a single second. Gunther immediately started climbing the stairs to run as far from his enemies as possible and avoid any risk. That split-second decision saved their lives because the vampire brat came flying out right after them, giving chase with terrifying speed. Benzel admitted he was impressed by the sheer courage of these guys, who were much more capable than he expected, but that did not stop the monster from wanting to devour them. Instead, it only made him crave their flesh even more. Feeling that his pursuer was already breathing right down his back, Gunther tried to run as fast as possible, while Ariel clung onto him tightly in absolute terror. With a burst of hope, they finally saw the long-awaited daylight ahead, meaning a Little more effort and they would reach the safe, open surface. Ariel's face brightened as she shouted happily, letting everyone know they were almost out, but her joyful scream was suddenly cut short by a shriek of terror that threatened to swallow up any hope of survival. The vampires managed to grab Gunther's arm, dragging him back down with brutal force while screaming that they would devour him anyway. It got to the point where the knight wanted nothing more than quiet. To get it, he decided to silence that annoying squealing. With a heavy swing, he struck his foes so hard that they ripped off the steps and flew downward. Gunther's arm was finally free, and the enemy could no longer stop him from moving forward, carrying Ariel along. After a few more minutes of sprinting as fast as they could, they finally broke out of that terrifying underground cemetery, which could have easily been their grave as well. Then, a long-awaited ray of light pierced into the warrior's eyes, forcing a hard squint, but Gunther did not. He wanted to savor this quiet moment of pure, unbelievable survival. They had actually escaped a dark, oppressive abyss that nearly became their tomb, but Ariel's sudden shriek shattered his peace and instantly dragged him back into a brutal, terrifying reality. Whipping his head around, he saw the girl was almost captured by Benzel, who had somehow reached the surface, completely ignoring the sunlight. His hideous head sneered, thrilled to finally lay his claws on her beautiful body. Multiple mad red eyes darted wildly in every single direction, impatiently anticipating how soon his twisted collection would finally be enriched with another lovely face. This time, Gunther just could not snatch the girl from his claws, leaving him completely helpless as he watched her was dragged away into the distance. Staring at the empty ground, the knight frantically tried to find a way to save her, since Ariel was his only source of life. Bitter despair and dark thoughts washed over him in massive waves, forcing a furious roar from his chest as he swore he would never let them steal his life. Yet victory did not always belong to Benzel. Believe it or not, even monsters have their bad days, times when his beloved, stolen faces suffered, scorched in the searing flames thrown by his enemies. Yes, those were incredibly dark and painful times indeed, making him want to tear humanity apart and watch them turn to ash. On one such painful day, when Benzel looked completely defeated and miserable, his loyal subordinates arrived at the lodge, deeply concerned about their master's physical state. He hissed that his grand revenge had utterly failed, all because of a single grotesque corpse knight who dared to stand in his path. His minions quickly comforted him, assuring his safety while promising to extract a bloody, agonizing vengeance on the warrior, bowing low to thank their lord for the love he always showed. But the creature shook its mane head, declaring that no one else could ever handle this crucial job, especially since he refused to let his pride stay completely crushed like this. He wanted to personally slaughter that knight and prove to everyone that his power was still absolute. The only thing he asked of his vile helpers was to bring him as many fresh, incredibly gorgeous new human faces as they could possibly find. His vile servants eagerly agreed, returning later to their success, boasting that they had handpicked 34 beautiful humans for him. These poor, innocent prisoners were tightly bound and terrified, completely unaware of what horrible, agonizing fate awaited them, but they knew no mercy would be found here. Meanwhile, Benzel's grotesque faces curled into malicious grins as he slowly the trembling captives. The lovely features on display were absolutely perfect for his growing, gruesome collection. Yet one specific captive stood out, easily capturing the vile creature's dark obsession. He wanted to slice off and wear her flawless face immediately. That poor victim was Ariel. Despite her intense terror, she glared back at the monster with pure defiance and anger. The grinning vampire whispered that she had absolutely no reason to worry, because once he consumed her, they would remain bound together for eternity. Meanwhile, Gunther was absolutely consumed by rage at how helpless he currently felt. To make matters even worse, his time was rapidly running out. His critical life force was slipping away. Luckily, Rene had survived the chaos and was rushing to help him stand once more back in place, which was pretty helpful under the circumstances, except the legs flat out refused to connect and function, even though the power load was barely halfway there. The captain was sliding into a total panic. He couldn't understand if they could manage without Ariel, so he asked Rene if they could implant a new power source. Rene had a sudden, dark suspicion that the warrior had no intention of rescuing the girl. Gunther honestly admitted that the thought had crossed his mind. Frowning, the captain said he couldn't guarantee anything. Right now, only Ariel's physical presence could ensure a full charge. He explained that Gunther had a device installed in his head that basically regenerates a corpse. Specifically, it has the power to keep dead flesh walking forever, but if the body decays to a certain point, there is absolutely no turning back, according to their calculations. The warrior only had 3 days left. This grim news, no joke, shook our hero to his core. Seriously, imagine having so little time left because once it stops, bringing him back to life is completely impossible. It didn't matter if he was somewhere safe or not, because according to Rene, if they didn't catch the machine stopping in time, he was dead. The captain even insisted they needed to reach the cemetery as fast as possible before his body completely decayed. He argued that creating a brand new energy source was impossible and probably wouldn't be ready for another couple of years. The implication was clear. Without Ariel, Gunther was going to die. Absorbing the heavy news, our hero couldn't believe it. He wondered what this device actually was, but Rene cut him off. No time for explanations. He promised to discuss the details once they had built a more trusting relationship. The captain then proceeded to attach Gunther's legs to his body. After a while, he announced that everything was connected. Frowning, the warrior asked why he heard a strange humming sound coming from nearby, to which the captain smirked, saying he had something pretty special for his right arm. He remembered that Gunther had once said killing Benzel up close would be too difficult, so now they had a perfect solution right here, a special weapon built for long-range combat. Seeing the warrior's confused expression, the captain asked what he thought of this new weapon. Gunther didn't say a word, just nodded in approval. While some could find reason to smile, others were currently drowning in a terrifying despair that slowly turned to sheer panic. The first victim, a blonde-haired man, was dragged before the monster who was about to steal his life and make him suffer. The one called Benzel stepped forward from the crowd, extending his hideous palms, tipped with sharp claws, straight toward the helpless victim. As it drew closer, the monster began telling him he shouldn't be afraid because it wouldn't hurt at all. As those long fingers neared his face, the man screamed, desperately trying to pull back, but some force held him frozen in place. Heavy hand pressed down on his head, unleashing an agonizing, deafening scream, as the blond man's face was suddenly covered with strange, pulsing red veins crawling up from under the vampire's skin. Soon, these thick veins covered his entire face, as if they were consuming him and trying to erase his entire being. The poor victim was in such a terrible state he couldn't even speak, so Benzel took the stage. The monster explained that his own blood was his ultimate weapon, and his dark thoughts could completely consume the mind of anyone targeted by his power, completely. Just like that, the victim's limp body collapsed right onto the cold floor. But his head was no longer attached. It was held firmly in the grip of a bloodthirsty monster who had just secured another twisted trophy for his collection. Suddenly, the severed head snapped its eyes open, now glowing a dark, blood-red color, while a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth twisted into a grotesque grin. Absolutely nothing of the original blonde man remained. The other prisoners who watched this horror unfold were completely paralyzed, terrified of meeting the same grim fate, but Ariel, dead silent. She showed absolutely no sign of fear. Instead, she proudly held her face high, gaze steady, staring directly at the corpse as if she were personally defying death itself. Benzel noticed. He absolutely hated the fact that someone wasn't cowering before him. And just like that, her boldness immediately made her his very next target. The severed head in his hand twitched, clearly thrilled that she would join them soon. No flinching, even with these terrifying threats, she stood incredibly tall. Not a single trace of fear showed on her beautiful face, none. While Benzel was visibly annoyed by her calm composure, he claimed he actually preferred fearless eyes. Consuming proud, fearless souls like her was always his absolute favorite way to feed. But he admitted he also missed the sweet despair of fools who finally realized their hopeless fate. Listening to his unhinged rambling, the girl coldly replied with complete indifference. She said that right now, what actually terrified her was something else entirely. Specifically, that everyone was so indifferent to his wretched soul that no one even tried saving him. Hearing this, the monster froze. A brief silence, then he burst into loud, mocking laughter. Mocking her, he declared that she was incredibly entertaining, and he loved her little joke. In fact, he wanted to hear Ariel repeat those exact words over and over. Once he finally severed her head from her shoulders, he eagerly reached out for her. But his dark moment was suddenly cut short by a sharp, aggressive voice shouting his name. A warrior charged, moving at absolute breakneck speed toward the demon. He had blonde hair, looking somewhat like the man Benzel just killed. The warrior screamed that he had waited a lifetime to get his revenge on this vile enemy of humanity. Determined to strike down the beast, he wanted to purge this wicked monster from the world. He refused to let this creature poison the earth any longer. His shining blade was now inches away from Benzel's neck, but this desperate, heroic charge. Completely hopeless, the poor challenger never stood a real chance and was doomed. The demon instantly paralyzed him, locking every single one of his limbs tight, holding him so incredibly tight that the young man couldn't even budge an inch. Benzel's minions quickly bowed, frantically apologizing for letting the prisoner break loose. But their master casually dismissed them. The pinned warrior refused to shut up, shouting that despite his own failure today, someone would eventually defeat the beast. A true hero would rise, someone to put an end to this monster forever. After all, humanity's unyielding will to live could never be snuffed out. These dramatic words didn't touch Benzel, they just deeply annoyed him. But he mockingly hoped more brave fools would keep coming to challenge him. Still, fools like this kept crossing his path. He loved watching those who believed it was worth giving up their lives for humanity. After all, watching their futile struggles in blind faith only kept the ancient vampire highly amused, clenching his teeth in anger. The captive spat that a bloodthirsty monster like him would never comprehend what they stood for. Suddenly, Benzel's face turned grim, flashing a hint of dark rage. He shoved his palm right forward, demanding the man take a very close look. The skin was horribly mangled and ruined. Utterly consumed by old burns, the dark beast explained that he had once saved a family from a blazing inferno with those very hands. He remembered every detail. Like it was yesterday, the choking smoke, the agonizing heat melting his skin, the pure unadulterated torture of it all. Yet through that blinding agony he still pushed forward to rescue yet another soul, but his reward was far from heroic. Nobody hailed him as a champion, and the crowds showed him zero respect. The young prisoner listened, completely stunned, as the fiend revealed that early on. There was some applause, but that soon curdled into endless disgust and human rejection. The blonde captive simply refused to believe a word of it, insisting that regular folk would never act so horribly without a damn good reason. But the cruel reality was simple. One look at the savior's horrifying features sent shivers down anyone's spine. It was a brutal truth, impossible to deny. In fact, the prisoner paralyzed in sheer terror the moment the beast showed his face. Benzel sneered, recounting how humanity instantly labeled him as a demonic freak. The very crowds who chanted his name turned to pure hatred once they saw him. Society cast him out completely, because not a single soul wanted an ugly protector lurking around. Was that really his crime? All Benzel ever did was throw himself into the fire to protect ungrateful strangers, yet his ruined face made them treat him like garbage, casting him away like some diseased animal they couldn't wait to discard. The raw agony of these bitter memories clearly still tore Benzel apart inside. That soul-crushing realization that an ugly face is enough to make the world hate you. He realized dying for others was just sheer stupidity. After all, pathetic humans are only good for burning and destroying things, not building. Although the tragic tale struck a chord, the bound man argued it changed nothing. It could never justify the horrific, mass-murdering monster Benzel had willingly chosen to become. But the vampire scoffed. One day, he claimed, the mortal would truly understand. Suddenly, a thick stream of blood bubbled right out of his scarred hand, stretching a gory thread toward the blonde captive, ready to swallow him whole. Just as those razor-sharp talons hovered inches away from the smooth skin, a booming, cold voice suddenly rang out, telling the monster he talked way too much. Benzel froze, startled, alongside his captive. Both waited with bated breath, bracing for the impact. Out of nowhere, a sharp blast erupted, though it completely missed its mark. In this pitch-black, hidden cavern, it was impossible to tell where the shot came from, but we know the truth. It was just Gunther grumbling about his faulty gear after failing to even scratch the towering vampire. Rene just shrugged, casually noting that the battle had barely even started. Watching them, Ariel's usually blank face cracked, showing actual emotion. Her gorgeous features softened with pure relief. Meanwhile, the dark warrior merely he shrugs his shoulders, admitting he never expected to see That girl alive, with a fiery temper like hers, she should have died first. Benzel hisses back, calling Gunther a complete fool for showing up all alone. To him, Gunther is practically begging for a brutal death right now. Rolling his eyes, Gunther does not even bother to give an answer. He adjusts his strange weapon, eager to test its limits once more. This chaos only ends when someone dies. He readies his weapon, the launcher. It was custom-made by Rene himself, built to be a true biological weapon. Powerful reconstructed muscles are reinforced by a sharp, heavy bone spike. It was crafted from a bison tibia, using engineered tissue to pull and push. Those biological fibers slowly stretch to build up an insane amount of pressure. Upon release, they launch deadly bone spikes forward at blinding speeds. Its destructive force easily surpasses any military crossbow or heavy ballista. Right now, those fibers are already stretching to their absolute limit. Only catch is he gets 6 bone spikes before it becomes totally useless. Gunther is totally fine, with the weapon turning into trash after this. It still gives him the perfect edge in a long-distance shootout. Riding deep into the dark woods, Rene reminds him they are out of time. Gunther needs to throw everything he has into taking down Benzel tonight. They must rescue Ariel before sunrise, so she has a fighting chance to escape. But Benzel's loyal minions do not burn in the sunlight. That means they will not stand a chance if they get cornered. Plus, Gunther cannot recharge on the run, and stopping means getting torn apart. Rene points out that their only real option is to kill the high-ranking vampire. Once the master dies, all the lesser beasts linked to his bloodline will crumble. Staring up at the pitch-black sky, Gunther wonders if they can actually pull this off. He tells his worried companion to relax, because they still hold a massive advantage. Even if he gets brutally mangled, his insane body will still keep fighting. Reaching the hidden cave is tough, but once they get close, it is unmistakable. Breaking inside is the easy part, but the real nightmare is waiting within. Gunther only has 15 minutes left on his clock before his body gives out. Defeating a powerful vampire lord and saving his power source in time seems impossible. But a hopeless situation like this does not make Gunther back down for a second. In fact, the sheer thrill of the challenge only gets his blood pumping faster. And honestly, he is not the only one feeling the sudden rush of adrenaline. Benzel is visibly terrified by the massive bone launcher aimed right at him. Yet his absolute confidence in his protective wall of stolen faces is even stronger. Cowardly hiding behind the souls of those he brutally consumed, he feels safe. He is dead certain nothing can pierce this sickening human meat shield. There is only one way to find out, and Gunther does not waste time. Unleashing the shot instantly, luck is definitely not on the vampire's side today. No matter how many screaming faces he stacks to build a perfect defense, it shatters. Benzel roars in absolute fury, unable to accept that his shield is gone. His ultimate barrier was broken, but Gunther is actually feeling pretty disappointed. He was fully aiming to put a bone spike straight through the bastard's skull. But something went wrong, and he only managed to damage a few faces. He swore his next bone arrow would pierce right through his enemy's heart. That level of confidence infuriated the vampire. He usually enjoyed breaking proud warriors. But this time, he feared he might actually break his teeth on this stubborn human. Driven by fear and sudden rage, the vampire turned and shrieked at his minions. He demanded to know why they were cowering in the corners of the cave. The servants protested, arguing they were faster than their master and could freeze him. They claimed they could easily take away the warrior's ability to move. After considering this, Benzel agreed to let them try, wanting nothing more than his own skin protected. He warned his minions to keep an eye on their enemies' bizarre weapons. But Gunther had no intention of wasting his precious bone arrow charges on them. These lesser weaklings were targets he could easily crush with his bare hands. Without a second thought, the knight lunged forward, bursting with sheer, raw power. His crushing blows were enough to make even the most terrifying monsters freeze. As his enemies fell under his furious strikes, absolutely nothing remained of them. They were instantly reduced to piles of ash, but a massive problem remained. There were simply too many vampires, and while he crushed one, others swarmed him. The disgusting beasts kept throwing themselves forward to protect their creator. They sneered that their collective will was steel, and no human could break them. Honestly, Gunther wasn't just planning to break them, he was about to flatten them. True to his word, he began crushing their heads directly with his bare hands. With a sickening pop, a vampire's skull shattered under his intense grip. Dark blood sprayed everywhere, completely soaking the night, seeing their comrade decapitated. The remaining vampires instantly fell back in sheer terror, their false bravery vanishing. None of them dared to step near him. This reaction made the warrior grin. Knowing these wretched monsters actually feared him was deeply satisfying. But their hesitation was short-lived, as they remembered their ultimate duty to Benzel. They had to protect their master, so they lunged forward once again. Luckily, Gunther easily dodged backward when the beasts realized his plan. They realized this whole fight was just a trick to let Ariel escape the cave. They hissed that nobody would leave alive. Gunther knew escaping wouldn't be easy. If they truly wanted to make it out, they had to eliminate any pursuit. That meant there was absolutely no point in running away from this battle. Instead, he had to dive straight into the slaughter and eradicate every single one. Shouting that their demonic lives were worthless, the knight went on a rampage. He ripped through them furiously, sending severed limbs flying in all directions. Yet the endless wave of monsters eager to die simply kept coming. Hearing a quiet chuckle, Gunther looked over and saw his opponent smiling. The vampire admitted that Benzel never valued them as real living beings. Because of that, their lives had absolutely zero worth to anyone. This realization made them completely fearless, since they had nothing left to lose. Gunther finally realized he was dealing with the absolute worst kind of soldier. They blindly followed commands, without a single thought for their own survival. That made them incredibly dangerous, charging into combat without needing any motivation. Their master's spoken word was the only thing they needed to face death. Things got wild. Those horrific heads were desperate to start devouring the face of their next victim, but whether they would succeed remained to be seen. Only one thing was certain: Gunther refused to back down. His fierce glare proved it. He decided his best first move was to try and take down those horrific skulls. He used his weapon to clear them. That helped somewhat, but other threats remained. He still had to fight off Benzel's lackeys, who rushed in to exploit his distraction. Once he finished off those pests, the heavy warrior quickly retreated. He knew any remains left behind in that massive pile would soon collapse on him. Even after taking heavy losses, Basil's heads kept lunging forward to feed. They wanted Gunther dead, but the warrior absolutely refused to go down. He realized his gun only had 3 shots left. Every bullet had to count. But finding Benzel among this sea of squirming, screaming faces was almost impossible. As he desperately searched for a way to flush out the cowardly vampire boss, a sudden blood-curdling shriek echoed through the cavern. The source of the scream was Ariel. She was pulling another reckless stunt, the kind that made him want to scream. The girl boldly stepped into the open cave, yelling out the monster's name. She screamed with everything she had, desperately trying to draw his attention. Gunther could not tell if she was incredibly foolish, insane, or just suicidal. Her shrieking deeply annoyed the vampires, prompting them to silence her immediately. But they had to act carefully to avoid ruining her beautiful face. Benzel was quite fond of her, as Gunther scrambled to think of a plan. A cold, razor-sharp blade sliced through the air right in front of his eyes. Then came a second strike. It slammed heavily into his chest. The impact was brutal. The smug attacker boasted about their unstoppable vampiric strength. He barked that their iron will made them superior to any mere mortal. That arrogant boast was about to be proven completely wrong. No matter how tough their resolve, these monsters still bled and broke. When it became clear the vampires could not bring Gunther down alone, the wall of grotesque faces decided to join the fray and attack together. Evading the massive beast, Gunther could still hear Ariel screaming in the distance. She kept yelling relentlessly, and he simply could not understand why. He worried that captivity under Benzel had finally pushed the girl over the edge. Soon the echoes of her voice faded when a vampire finally caught her. But Ariel refused to surrender. She wasn't giving up so easily. Before long, she was thrashing and shouting again to bait their true enemy. Her desperate plan was actually working, pushing Benzel right to his limits. Now watch closely. You can actually see the monster struggling to stay hidden. The writhing flesh barrier shielding their master was beginning to falter. The protective wall of heads realized their defense would soon shatter. Ariel noticed the enemy's defense was cracking. She yelled to Gunther, urging him to watch how they reacted. She pointed out that certain faces in the pile were moving first. She believed those specific heads were guarding Benzel's actual physical location. But before she could explain further, a shadow lunged from the darkness. The vampire snatched her from behind, roughly clamping his hand over her mouth. Her gut told her she was right, and soon it became impossible to ignore. Especially when that creep threatened to rip her tongue out, but even if he did, it was useless. Gunther had already figured out his target and fired the first shot. He watched intensely, tracking every single twitch, every blink, and every tiny facial reaction. Every single change in expression mattered because he recalled some faces reacting faster than others. This was absolutely no random coincidence, meaning he was on the right track. So when his shot tore a massive gap through the faces, he knew Benzel was nearby. The monster hissed in rage but quickly calmed down, realizing he could just hide again. If the next shot missed, the bastard would easily slip right back into that wall of faces. But there was one massive problem that needed solving immediately. But before it was too late, he noticed the severed nerves that connected those faces. Losing those connections meant the monster was losing control over his own body. Gunther knew this was his golden chance to unleash his final 2 shots. This was the moment to end it all, and the following blast was absolutely deafening. A massive explosion sent the surrounding vampires scattering in all directions. That shot was devastating. Now this is where things get really bad for Benzel. The devastating blast detonated right next to his body, grazing his flesh with absolutely terrifying force. But he was just getting started. The shockwave terrified the arrogant beast. Benzel actually believed no one would ever dare to stand up to him. With only one single shot remaining, Gunther knew he had to focus and make it count. He focused completely. Seeing their master in danger, the vampires panicked and went wild. Desperate to save him, they tried to destroy the warrior's weapon in time. The entire horde of bloodsuckers instantly swarmed the warrior, throwing themselves directly in his path. A massive wave of bloodthirsty monsters piled directly on top of Gunther. Their sheer weight actually managed to stop him from taking that final shot. But that desperate defense only bought those monsters a couple of much-needed seconds to breathe. Gunther quickly broke free, lined up his target, and fired anyway. Benzel froze. Fear gripped the monster, then Gunther's devastating blast struck dead center. The monster's physical body was obliterated, yet he survived. Deep within the wreckage, the monster's black heart was still beating. Honestly, total despair washed over Ariel as she stared at the horror. It felt like a complete defeat, and they were doomed to join his wall of faces. Their time had run out. There was absolutely nothing left they could do. In a final act of desperation, she screamed for Gunther to destroy his own head device. Gunther blankly stared back, completely confused by her bizarre order. Why would she call this a failure when he had just landed a direct hit? He was far from finished with this monster, and round 2 was about to start. Time was ticking, but Gunther still had one final card up his sleeve. Ariel watched in disbelief, wondering how he could possibly have another weapon left. But his true secret weapon was not a firearm, it was his own raw physical power. He effortlessly shattered the vampire's grip and surged forward once again. His body was his deadliest weapon, and he was pushing it to the limit. There was only one goal left: quickly reach whatever remained of Benzel's ruined, shattered flesh. He had to obliterate it completely, so the monster could never regenerate. Around them, the suffocating black shadows began to twist and thicken, warping into a shape that looked more and more like some hideous monster's torso. It eventually regenerated, returning to its prior form, though it was forever changed. It would never be the same. Once, a young man wanted to join the militia because he believed saving innocent lives was the ultimate purpose he wanted to be. Just like his father, a true hero protecting the weak, and so he became a helper to those in need, but it cost him a brutal price. Following the tragedy, the people did not hail him as a savior. Quite the opposite, he got only mocked. The very crowds he once yearned to shield cast him out. He had no place among them because they saw him as a monster, a face once shining with hope for a bright future was now utterly disfigured by the harsh reality before him. The crushing weight of it forced him to cry out to his late father, who was no longer there. He asked if giving up his life was truly worth it. He was treated like filth simply because his face looked different. The man was lost, left with absolutely nothing to believe in or strive for. He knew absolutely nothing anymore. Then comforting solace finally arrived, as he wept. A gentle hand stroked his head with zero malice. It had been so long since anyone touched him kindly, forcing him to open his eyes. Wiping away the tears, he looked up to find a Noble vampire standing there, radiating an immense, ancient pressure. This blonde-haired noble revealed he had been observing him for quite some time, and shared his desire to forge a brand new world. The man listened, fascinated, hearing that this path of creation would be incredibly brutal and painful. He would need help from outcasts just like him. It sparked a tiny hope for a better future, so he asked what kind of world the vampire wanted. Noble replied that injustice would have no place in their new reality. That promise was exactly what the broken young man desperately wanted. He wanted people to see his soul, not a face scarred by trauma. The vampire offered him that exact chance to build a far better world than the miserable one they lived in, so he allied with a monster he once considered his mortal enemy. Now, his true enemies were the humans he once risked his life to protect, but that dream is dead. Their grand vision is ruined as Gunther's fist plunges straight through the monster's chest. The warrior wanted humanity to finally be left in peace. A rush of triumph washes over him as the sweet taste of victory draws near. Gunther smiles wide. Right before him, Benzel's physical form begins to dissolve. Knowing his end was finally here, the dying foe wondered if there was ever room for a monster like him among those praised heroes. His subordinates watch in absolute terror. They scream out his name, but receive no reply. Within seconds, their bodies disintegrate into ash, just like their master, standing alone in a pool of vampire blood. Seeing that nothing of them remains, the tired warrior finally feels peace. A carriage escorted by nearly 12 soldiers slowly rolls out of the dark cavern. A sudden, violent bump and rattling wheels wake Gunther up, who collapsed right after his brutal victory. As his eyes open, the warrior did not immediately realize that it was all over and he was safe. Anxiety still lingered. Once the realization finally hit that the nightmare was truly over, his body reacted. He suddenly bolted upright from his seat, only to be stopped by a sharp command. Fixing the wire connecting them, Ariel warned him not to move so abruptly while plugged in. She praised the warrior, telling him he did an incredible job back there. Because of his actions, countless lives were saved, and Rene quietly agreed with her. Rene admitted he never expected such a swift victory over a high-ranking vampire. Gunther looked over his companions and pointed out just how risky the operation was. Then he asked if those low-level vampire pests had been completely wiped out. Rene nodded and confirmed that the minions carrying the Supreme's blood had perished alongside him. Gunther thought it over, realizing the best way to destroy these monsters was hitting the leader. Taking out the boss, that was their ultimate shortcut to surviving this war. Ariel agreed that it worked in theory, but the last pure-blood vampire was Julius. Ever since Julius assassinated the Emperor, he had vanished entirely without a trace. This seemed strange to Gunther, since purebloods were supposedly the strongest of all. With that kind of strength, they had absolutely no reason to hide from a fight. Yet nobody knew why Julius avoided battle, leaving Gunther deep in thought. Breaking the brief silence, the warrior asked to clarify if all vampires fed on human blood. When they confirmed this, Gunther found their entire grand plan completely illogical. If these beasts wiped out humanity, they would destroy their own primary food source. Rene admitted it was weird, but survival was their only real option right now. As quiet fell over the carriage again, Ariel spoke up about their destination. She revealed they were heading straight to headquarters to gather more intel. Seeing the sheer confusion in the warrior's eyes, Rene spoke up. He told him that there was only one human city left standing in the world. It was an untouched sanctuary where all the remaining survivors were now gathering. Ariel added that all of Gunther's upgrades and equipment were developed there. It was humanity's final stronghold, unconquered for hundreds of years. These legendary tales sparked Gunther's curiosity, making him eager to see it himself. Looking out, the captain announced that their target was finally in sight. They had reached the coordinates designated for launching their grand counterattack. Gunther realized they were approaching sacred ground. This was the ultimate beacon of hope for humanity to escape the vampires. This legendary place of sanctuary bore the incredibly beautiful name of Wajal. But now it was completely on fire. Unbelievable, right? The last safe zone burning. Rene and Ariel stared out the window, unable to believe their eyes. Gunther sighed heavily, noting that humanity's last hope would soon be reduced to ash. While the humans processed this nightmare, some vampires were sleeping peacefully. However, their peaceful slumber was about to be abruptly shattered. A terrified vampire suddenly jolted awake, screaming frantically that Benzel had been killed. Consumed by sheer panic, he tried to warn everyone of their impending doom. He shrieked that the ruthless enemies were already here to execute them all. Thrashing in the grasp of a much larger vampire, the kid screamed hysterically. He begged for his life while the big vampire tried to calm him down. He assured him they were safe, though deep down, he knew this was terrible news. They knew he was dangerous. Turning to Julius, they wondered if such a terrifying feat could actually be done by humans. They simply could not believe that mortals were capable of this. The blonde, ancient vampire, however, remained completely silent. He was lost deep in his own dark thoughts, paying zero attention to what was happening all around him. Then he blinked, snapping back to reality, and immediately ordered his trusted acolyte Yen to investigate what monster had killed Benzel. For now, they had to wait for news. Only after gathering information could they formulate a proper plan of attack. There were many reasons why Bahal was called the Holy Land, but the main reason was its absolute geographical advantage. It was a perfect fortress, practically blessed from above. Perched on the continent's edge, jagged mountains flanked them. Trade here was incredibly difficult, no growth. Still, they could easily produce their own food, but getting to the sea was also extremely tough due to the jagged, rocky cliffs. The only way to enter was a single bridge, stretching a massive 1,200 meters long, so if the gates are well defended, they can easily repel 10 times their own number. It was built to never fall, and that was exactly why they called it blessed. But now brace yourselves, because a totally different, shocking picture was waiting. The massive city bridge was engulfed in devastating flames, with wreckage everywhere. Rene could not possibly understand what happened when they left. Everything here was perfectly fine. As they entered, he called out to a guard named Leonard. Leonard immediately whipped his head around, visibly relieved to see that the captain was completely unharmed. Shaking Rene's hand, Leonard stammered that his warnings might be too late. Rene grinned, claiming he was not that easy to kill, but Leonard's expression filled with genuine, deep concern as he asked what happened to Ariel. Hearing her name, Ariel quickly stepped forward, explaining that thanks to Mr. Welp's incredible care, they returned home completely safe. Upon hearing those words, Leonard blushed deeply, sheepishly telling her she could just call him by his first name. He also stammered out his joy that they were all safe, looking away from Ariel's lovely face. His eyes finally landed on the massive stranger. Known as Gunther, the legendary corpse knight asked who he had the honor of addressing. Rene quickly explained that Leonard was the leader in charge of defending the great walls of Bahal. This man was incredibly kind, so he warmly invited them inside, realizing they had been through hell. The guards' men had already put out the fire, making it perfectly safe. Now, looking at the scorched ruins, Gunther could not understand how a place so holy and grand could be reduced to this. Leonard sighed, admitting they had given up on defending the outer bridge by pushing their line back to the main walls. They had completely lost control. It made sense. But Rene was desperately curious about what else had happened in Bahal. Since they defeated Benzel, they had hoped everything would be fine here. But when Leonard heard the shocking news that the dreaded vampire was finished, he stood frozen in disbelief. Gunther smirked, bragging that he dealt with him personally. Leonard's eyes practically popped out of his skull. It was clear he never expected resurrecting Gunther as an undead knight would actually work. Once the shock wears off, Leonard reveals that as soon as Rene and Ariel left, they were hit. Ariel immediately assumes that their attackers must have been higher-tier vampires. But Leonard cannot be sure because these beasts were completely different from previous ones. They possessed a bizarre, twisted appearance with a deeply unsettling shape. Remembering those grim events makes Leonard feel deeply uneasy. Those creatures turned Valhalla into a total slaughterhouse, a sickening, chaotic show. Hearing this, Gunther bristles. How could anyone call a bloodbath a show? But Leonard snaps back that Gunther would not doubt it if he had seen it himself. Their bitter argument is suddenly cut short when Rene interrupts them. He asks if the enemy forces actually managed to break through the fortress gates. Leonard nods grimly, admitting the massive invasion dealt a devastating blow. With the city defenses crippled, Leonard demands that Gunther stay behind to guard the bridge. He expects him to hold the line until the structural repairs are finished. That arrogant tone, Gunther absolutely hates being ordered around by anyone. He makes it clear that he has absolutely no intention of taking orders from anyone. But his stubbornness is not just pride. To him, humans are merely cannon fodder. Staying safely tucked away in the rear simply keeps his own chances of survival high. Such blatant cowardice infuriates Leonard, pushing the guard captain right over the edge. He looks at Gunther like he is staring at an utterly ignorant fool. He asks the warrior if he even understands why he is allowed to stand freely in this town. When Gunther stays silent, Leonard explodes, shouting that Gunther is meant to be their weapon. To build him, 136 people sacrificed their very lives. Brilliant researchers slaved away just to craft his powerful prosthetic limbs. Every piece of him was bought with the blood of men protecting the Holy Land. Leonard is utterly disgusted, viewing Gunther as a selfish gladiator who knows nothing of sacrifice. He is someone who would gladly trample over others just to save his own skin. Raising his voice to scream, the furious captain makes a bitter declaration. He claims that he should have been the corpse knight, not a coward like Gunther. He refuses to accept this heartless monster as their savior or humanity's last hope. Gunther just hides a smirk, stepping close with a dark look in his eyes. He tells Leonard that whenever he meets righteous fools, he only wants to say one thing. Leaning in, Gunther whispers a stream of the most vile, offensive insults imaginable. The filthy words pierce Leonard to the core, instantly driving him into a blind rage. Screaming in fury, Leonard draws his blade and lunges forward in a reckless assault. It is completely futile. Gunther is operating on an entirely different level of power. With a single swift motion, Leonard is sent hurtling over the edge of the wall. He crashes hard into the dirt below as panicked soldiers rush to his side. Witnessing the brutal drop, Ariel is absolutely furious and immediately rounds on Gunther. She reminds him that she explicitly warned him not to start any fights right now. Gunther just smirks, claiming the captain started it so it was clearly self-defense. Naturally, his cheap excuse does absolutely nothing to calm the angry female commander. She shoots him a terrifying look that sends a violent shiver down his spine. The tense night finally passes as the morning sun rises over the shimmering blue water. Leonard slowly opens his eyes, but he is in terrible shape. The brutal fall left him with a broken body and a shattered pride. Seeing the commander alive, he sighed, expressing deep and bitter regret. Regret that he could not send him to hell. Still, ignoring this, Ariel spoke. Ariel turned to Gunther, explaining that for humanity to finally win this war, he would need help. Could not fight entirely on his own, regardless of his power. Looking the girl right in the eyes, he listened to how much manpower made his modified body. Even a mighty body will eventually fail if a single part is faulty, she warned. They need constant, steady labor. So his actual mission now was to save as many people as possible and protect the Holy Land to keep the supply flowing. Staring at his heavy arm, the corpse knight wondered if he was expected to fight absolutely every single monster. Ariel nodded in agreement, whispering that this was their absolute best shot. Gunther sighed, dryly remarking that in that case, he would need a new weapon immediately. Ignoring his sarcasm, Rene announced that a newly upgraded shipment had arrived. Opening the chest revealed a bizarre mechanical arm equipped with snapping jaws. Jaws lined its surface, but unfortunately, they only had 2 of these experimental units. This disappointed both Gunther and Ariel. She demanded to know what happened. They expected many more weapons. Leonard frowned, apologizing immediately. He explained that almost their entire military force was busy desperately defending the Grand Fortress and putting out fires, leaving the blacksmiths with absolutely zero time to manufacture more guns. Wait, check this out. Gunther was less bothered by the count than the look. Honestly, his new prosthetic arm looked more like a gaudy wall decoration. This deeply offended the commander, who insisted the weapon possessed an incredibly devastating bite. The second arm was even stranger, featuring a weird red, unfolding material. It stretched out to create a shield. Gunther examined the hand closely. He instantly realized this highly adaptable shield arm would be incredibly useful during combat. Seeing his interest, Ariel explained that this was a special shell shield. Its size could be freely adjusted, offering far better protection than steel. Plus, it is completely fire-resistant. Still, Gunther wondered when they could build a bone launcher. Even though that bone launcher only had 6 shots, they were devastating. Ariel pondered for a moment, admitting it would take 6 long months. Since every single weapon required highly unique crafting components, except for raw human limbs. Those were easily replaceable. The warrior sighed, finding nothing completely satisfactory. Shrugging, the girl admitted reality was harsh. Scavenging rare materials during an active war was incredibly difficult. Leonard stood up, promising to return to them the moment he received the official patrol report. Rene followed him out, having plenty of urgent duties of his own. Before leaving, they wished the pair a restful night after their ordeal. And just like that, another day slips away as night falls. The sun sinks below the horizon, and the streetlights slowly turn on. Yet the undead warrior felt no urge to sleep, unsure if he even needed rest anymore. Instead, he studied his new blade, deeply admiring its perfect balance. A weapon like this was exactly what he needed for battle. Ariel watched him in absolute silence before finally breaking the quiet with a soft sigh. She chided him for being far too harsh in his talk with the commander. He had been chosen as their champion after careful deliberation, after all. The royal family, nobles, and common laborers alike, all of them agreed. This role belonged only to Gunther, so he didn't need to worry about anyone else taking his spot. Absolutely zero worries, after all, even. Ariel herself truly believed that Gunther alone could save their world, but the knight said he never once worried about anyone wanting to be in his shoes. She wanted to say she was glad, but froze when Gunther brought up the 136 people who died trying to be power sources for him. It was heartbreaking to realize how many lives were lost during those experiments. The corpse knight asked why she chose this path after seeing so much death. After a quiet moment, the girl softly explained her reasons. Someone absolutely had to do it, and she wanted to be the one who stepped up. Gunther saw a tiny spark of hope in her eyes. She believed in a better future for their people, but he would never understand her. After that, they continued. Charging in silence, Gunther staring at gray walls while Ariel read her book. Suddenly, their quiet night was shattered by Leonard bursting into the room. Calling for the knight in a total panic, despite their recent clashes, he warned Gunther to prepare himself because their enemies were right outside, our hero. Now this is where the fun starts. Time to test those weapons and show everyone exactly what he was capable of. They headed outside the city and crossed the bridge, standing together to peer into the pitch-black darkness, waiting for their unexpected guests to show up. Since charging was finished, Gunther quickly unplugged the power cable, connecting him to the girl to avoid hurting her with any sudden movements. Leonard rushed over, telling Ariel to keep a safe distance. Staring at the warrior, the girl sternly told him to do whatever it takes to come back alive. The warrior knew her words were driven by saving a successful experiment rather than actual concern. But he nodded anyway, sliding his heavy helmet back on. The corpse knight stepped forward. He hated waiting to be attacked. Choosing to always strike first, he silently resolved that whoever came, he would completely destroy anyone who posed even the slightest threat. Right now, the forest was silent, dead silent. Even the animals were quiet, forecasting trouble. Finally, the first dark shape of an unknown monster emerged in the distance. It was completely alone, but so bizarre that Leonard's warning echoed in his mind. A total freak. No one had ever seen this before. Watching the enemy closely, Gunther noticed its awkward movements. It looked like the beast was surprisingly slow. With vampire-like speed, he could easily block any strike from above in an instant. Our warrior decided to get closer, wanting to end this creature immediately, no matter how fast or strong it was. Suddenly, the beast shifted its weight and lunged directly at Gunther, screaming for everyone in the audience to pay attention to its arrival. The monster was spouting pure nonsense about how happy it was to see its beloved fans who tuned in for the show. Apparently, the creature had poured the entire soul of Ebelina into tonight's performance. It was finally time for the first act. It mockingly called him the Pig King and wanted to keep rambling but got cut short because Gunther had. He was so incredibly close. His blade almost grazed the beast. But as he swung, his sword sliced through empty air, completely missing. Completely baffled, the corpse knight stood frozen, knowing that strike should have hit. It should have run the monster straight through, but did nothing. Laughing, the bizarre vampire mocked his audience for being far too impatient. They had absolutely no respect for the order of his performance, which was crucial. Stepping cleanly out of the shadows, the vampire grandly announced the title of his play. The first act was called The King of Pigs in the Chorus of Dwarfs. With his eyes flashing a brilliant crimson, the bloodsucker declared the show open. Then he dragged his own long claws across his palm, letting the blood flow. As the crimson droplets splattered onto the dirt, they began to warp. They dissolved into a thick, foul-smelling mist of pure blood that quickly expanded. It coalesced into a massive tent, just like a traveling circus arena. Gunther finally understood what Leonard meant by a vampire's bloody stage show. The gory curtains of the circus tent began to shudder and sway unnaturally. They rippled as if caught in a heavy breeze, but there was no wind. Suddenly, the flaps flew open, and a blur shot out from the darkness inside. It moved blindingly fast. Luckily, Gunther had his trusty shield ready. He braced himself to block the heavy blow, finally getting a clear look at the attacker. It was indeed a vampire, but dressed up like he belonged in a masquerade. This thing clawed viciously, but it could not break the warrior's guard. That heavy shield held strong, absorbing every single strike perfectly. Suddenly, the bloody curtains parted once more, and trust me, things get way worse. A small army of identical masquerade beasts came pouring out into the open. They swarmed the knight, circling him in a dizzying, endless loop. Every single bloodsucker bared its fangs, brandishing a wicked blade. Watching with sheer disgust, Gunther could not comprehend this madness. These tiny deranged freaks were small, but they knew exactly how to fight. Their coordinated strikes began overwhelming him completely. Within seconds, they dragged Gunther down, piling on top of him like rabid beasts. He could not stand, but a sudden flash of steel changed everything. His heavy blade swept through the air, cleaving the small monsters in half. Breaking free from their grasp, he resolved to slaughter every single one of them. It was no easy task, but Gunther did not bring an entire armory for nothing. None of his gear seemed useless now as he sprang back up to fight. He immediately began hacking away at the pests, trying to drag him back down. Yet the warrior deflected every single strike, despite their highly coordinated assault. These annoying little bloodsuckers swarmed him as a single, overwhelming wave. Finally, with most of them dead, Gunther brought his sword down on the survivor. The last stubborn creature desperately tried to resist his brutal onslaught. It refused to back down, its glowing eyes burning with absolute hatred. But struggling was useless against the crushing weight of Gunther's immense strength. The dwarf could not withstand the blow for more than a brief second. Dark blood splattered the floor, but the twisted show was far from over. Another identical beast came charging out of the tent, wearing down the tired knight. He was done wasting his time, so he quickly came up with a new plan. This time he decided to be proactive, keeping the dwarves from surrounding him by attacking whoever got too close. Once the tiny pests were cleared, our warrior chose to finally set his sights on their leader, who was clearly hiding out inside the tent. Out from the absolute darkness of the night, two glowing red eyes stared straight back. Locked onto Gunther like a predator, he really did not expect this vampire to blast absolute fire right at him. It really looked like they wanted to burn him alive. For him, that shield was completely fireproof, saving him from the flames and leaving his opponent completely disappointed. Right after the fiery show, a massive pig-like beast burst out of the tent, carrying a screeching dwarf on its back who held a burning torch high. Now the knight finally understood what this strange show was all about. Having already faced both that monstrous, fire-breathing pig king and that bizarre, chanting dwarf choir, tiny vampire hissed in fury, warning that any enemy standing in their way would be crushed instantly. Right on cue, another massive pillar of fire exploded outward, threatening to incinerate absolutely everything. The knight had his trusty shell shield to block the devastating heat. The dwarf screamed that the king's flames would burn him to a crisp, so he warned his opponent to stand perfectly still and not move, but obviously no one was going to listen to that tiny monster. Gunther took careful, steady steps forward, slowly pushing right through the wall of fire. Seeing that the corpse knight was still standing there breathing, the vampire stood utterly shocked. He could not believe someone survived the pig king's blast. He screamed at his beast to unleash even more flames, hoping to wipe this stubborn knight right off the earth, but no matter how intense the heat grew, his trusty shield absorbed the brunt of it, and our warrior kept marching forward. Honestly, Gunther was so used to this heavy pressure that the attack felt pretty weak to him. This barrier was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Realizing that breaking this knight was going to be an uphill battle, the genuinely terrified vampire realized that very soon, a brutal face-to-face showdown was heading his way fast. In fact, our hero's fist was already flying straight toward the bloodsucker's face to put a quick end to this joke once and for all. Still, the corpse knight kept plowing forward through the blazing heat. He was Driven by one thing, his target was close, meaning this fight would end very soon. As the dense flames finally began to clear, he spotted his long-lost weapon, the sword those pests had knocked away, lodged firmly in the dirt not too far from where he stood. He quickly yanked it free and began marching directly toward his terrified enemies. Knowing that all his doubts were completely pointless, in reality, everything was much simpler than he expected. His helpless enemies could only watch in absolute terror. Now our hero knew the real fun was about to start, something he had not enjoyed in a long time. After all, the second act was starting, and that meant only one thing. The show must go on. As a new path opened up, Gunther wasted no time stepping inside. After all, finding the head vampire was the only way to end this. Heading down a tight corridor, the knight soon entered a massive circular chamber. Right in the middle sat a bizarre display that looked like a weapon driven deep into the floor. Looking around, our warrior had to admit his foes had a real eye for theatrical design. Suddenly, the creepy vampire he had spotted earlier materialized right. The beginning of his twisted show emerges from the darkness as the foul vampire starts speaking. He tells Gunther that he is the first guest for this act. Since this is a very special show, the monster wants to prepare properly. Tired of this incredibly annoying speech, the corpse knight immediately swings his heavy sword at him. But the vampire quickly leaps back, declaring the start of Act 2. Right after that, he bounces as far away as possible so the warrior cannot reach him. The fact that this bastard is completely untouchable is extremely frustrating for Gunther. He is already completely exhausted from wasting his precious time on this utter nonsense. He just cannot understand how his opponent manages to dodge everything so easily. There is a very good chance that his surprisingly flexible body is helping him do it. Rubbing his pale hands together, the creature begins to ramble again. He proudly claims he prepared this monologue carefully, while blood starts flowing freely from his palms. It seems that the red liquid is about to change shape very soon. Instead of forming a brand new weapon, the fluid begins to completely consume the vampire. It wraps around him like a red cloth, creating something incredibly durable. The head of the bloodsucker appears from the red threads to make his announcement. He shouts that the audience will now witness the ultimate confession of the actor. Right after that, his face is also covered by a thick red veil. Now the entire crooked body of this crazy actor is completely covered in a thick cloth of blood. This bizarre transformation makes the monster much stronger and completely invulnerable. When Gunther attacks, the vampire easily wriggles out of the way. He dodges so incredibly fast that our hero simply cannot land even a single direct hit. It really seems like his enemy can anticipate every single upcoming strike. The moment Gunther moves, the enemy body reacts immediately and completely ruins his plans. Since he has such a slippery enemy, Gunther decided to alter his strategy. Pretending to swing his heavy sword again, the warrior suddenly kicks the hard ground instead. He kicks the rocks with all his might, shattering them into sharp shrapnel. But the vampire smoothly dances away from every single sharp stone flying straight at him. This is simply unthinkable, and the corpse knight can barely contain his anger. Looking at his angry expression, the crazy actor-killer only chuckles at him. Then he begins pulling a sharp sword straight out of his mouth, just like a magician. Armed with a blade, the vampire immediately lunges forward to attack Gunther. Our hero barely has enough time to raise his shield against that blinding, lightning-fast speed. Despite the heavy onslaught, the sturdy knight does not stagger under the pressure. He finally finds the right moment and swings the vampire sword away, forcing him further back. However, this retreat gives our hero absolutely no time to rest. Another fierce attack follows immediately, forcing the warrior to parry and counter at once. But no matter how precisely he strikes, the beast keeps dodging effortlessly. As they clash once again in a wild struggle, the enemy blade sweeps close to Gunther. The sharp blade barely misses his face, but it does not wound him. Instead, the vampire delivers a brutal, heavy kick that throws the knight completely backward. He flies straight out of the tent, spinning midair to land safely. This prevents a rough landing, but Gunther is still absolutely furious. He is completely livid that he has not managed to kill this incredibly annoying pest yet. Suddenly, the vampire leaps out of the tent to finish the fight. To finish him off, meanwhile, this entire brutal showdown is being watched through telescope. Rene anxiously asks about Gunther, but Leonard's reply is pretty grim. Their corpse knight is being pushed to his absolute limits by that savage beast. It looks like that creature is easily blocking every single one of Gunther's Tax, on top of that, it has somehow taken control of the local dwarves. Their warrior is pinned. Seeing him trapped near the bridge, Rene loses his cool. He snatches the telescope right out of the commander's hands to see. While he panics, Ariel remains completely calm, her eyes locked on the distant horizon. Meanwhile, Gunther is locked in a struggle that only gets more intense. The clash is brutal. For now, his only option is playing defense. Pure defense, he hides behind his shell shield, absorbing blow after blow. Every time he tries to swing, the fast beast just slips away. He wanted a real challenge, not this endless game of tag, but he has to survive. A clever plan is needed to at least scratch this arrogant vampire. Unfortunately, he is making absolutely zero progress. Meanwhile, his opponent is loving it. Even with his face hidden, you can tell the vampire is thoroughly enjoying himself. Pure sadism, he loves playing with his food and watching his prey boil. Feasting on Gunther's helplessness and blind anger is a total treat for this monster. Back at the fort, Ariel takes the telescope to analyze the fight herself. She quickly realizes that the beast easily reads every standard move. To win, Gunther has to throw away logic and get completely unpredictable. Rene is visibly sweating. He turns to the others and asks if they can help. Leonard thinks it over, but his ultimate conclusion is pretty discouraging for the team. Their cannons are gone. Wrecked in the last fight, they are left helpless. All they can do is try shooting light weapons from the gate. But a warning interrupts them. They cannot let this fight stay on the bridge. Rene asks why that matters, and her explanation makes his stomach drop. Gunther's body is made of incredibly dense, heavy muscle with zero body fat. Because of this, the final conclusion is pretty obvious. If he falls in, he will sink like a stone. No hope. Disaster strikes right before their eyes. Just as the warning leaves her lips, she watches the horror unfold. The vampire ruthlessly shoves the heavy knight off the edge of the bridge. Her face instantly pales with sheer terror and total helplessness. Their strongest shield is falling, and only a direct miracle can save him now. Moments later, his heavy metal frame is swallowed by the freezing, wild waves. A close call. At the final second, Gunther jams his sword into rock. He swings his body upward, barely hanging a few centimeters above the crashing sea. Water is a complete death sentence that will easily drag him down forever. Once submerged, there is absolutely no coming back to the surface for him. With a current this violent, even a normal swimmer would drown in seconds. Not yet, Gunther is not giving up, and this fight is far from over. Far from over, and he desperately needs to claw his way back onto that bridge. It is a massive struggle, especially since his core energy is nearly depleted. Right now, that lack of power is hitting him harder than ever before. But as our hero slowly drags himself upward, something else begins to shift. Gunther never expected this high-level vampire to be so brutally strong and invulnerable. As he approaches the bridge, the massive monster spots him and roars fiercely. The beast instantly springs into action. This bridge has never seen such violence. But even with the terrible odds, the warrior refuses to give up now. He knows that the survival of the entire city rests on his shoulders. He has to destroy this monster once and for all right here today. This creature dared to bring blood and fire straight to the Holy Land. Guarding humanity's last stronghold, Gunther taps his sword against the cold stone floor. He proudly tells the beast that he has slain many powerful monsters before. This vampire is simply next on his list to send straight to hell. The warrior promises to end this nightmare soon and walk away completely victorious. But sudden panic-filled shouts from the city walls cut his bold speech short. His sharp hearing picks up an urgent order that he must retreat immediately. Gunther absolutely hates taking orders, but he knows when he is outmatched here. With his mechanical energy sitting at practically zero, fighting on is pure suicide. The moment a tiny gap opens in the gate, he bolts for safety. He slips inside just seconds before the massive iron doors slam shut forever. Catching his breath, the nervous knight adjusts his helmet and starts to wonder. He hopes his allies actually have some sort of real plan for him. He approaches Rene and the crew, demanding to know what is going on. Gunther argues that he should be out there on the battlefield right now. But the girls quickly set him straight. He cannot win this alone. Talk about a desperate plan. They have to hold out until dawn. Ariel explains their grim situation. They have absolutely no defensive weapons left. Right now, Gunther is the only weapon the entire city has left. There are 5 hours left until sunrise, but his battery is dead. His night energy will barely keep him running for another 2 hours. They need to clean him up, swap his arm, and recharge him. Checking his vitality index, Ariel points out a major catch in their plan. To get his mechanical body back to peak condition takes 20 minutes. Rene adds that Gunther cannot move a single muscle during this recovery. While the recharge happens, they must protect both him and young Ariel. Gunther openly asks if they can actually pull off this risky plan. Their tense conversation is suddenly cut short when Leonard steps into the room. Leonard silently watches as they work on the corpse knight's mechanical body. He wants to keep watching, but frantic shouts outside break his focus. The warnings are clear, the terrifying vampire is closing in on them. The team gears up as their commander delivers a very grim announcement. They must buy the warrior 20 minutes, no matter the bloody cost. Leonard urges his troops to fight, reminding them that defense is priority. Gunther watches in heavy silence, feeling the incredible stress of the moment. These ordinary human guards are completely powerless against a highly advanced vampire. Honestly, 20 minutes sounds like a guaranteed death sentence for all of them. Rene admits that he understands the risks, and so does every guard. But they will still gladly fight to the death for their beloved home. Those words showed Gunther what it really meant to stand by your duty and love your home. Despite the clear threat of death, the soldiers fearlessly held their line. They refused to retreat. Pure rage and fierce determination burned in their eyes. Every single one of them wanted to destroy anyone who dared threaten the safety of Vahel. To boost his twin brother's spirits, Leonard warned they had to stop the fire here. If they failed to catch the flames now, nobody else could light this deep darkness. Spear tips forward, the men stood frozen, waiting for terror to break through their gates. No wait, the vampire easily smashed a massive hole right through the gate. He flew straight inside. Rene tried his best to ignore the horrific screams echoing around him. Those cries came from his friends, his neighbors, people he greeted in the streets every day. It was pretty obvious that Ariel was barely keeping her own panic under control too. Everyone knew the city would suffer heavy casualties before this bloody day was over. They were locked away in a safe room, but even there, spilled blood began to seep in. There was simply too much blood. Gunther knew he had to act. But he was paralyzed, completely unable to move a single finger. The connection wire bound him to Ariel. When another agonizing shriek echoed, he was utterly helpless. All he could do was squeeze his eyes shut as a brutal slaughter raged outside. The monster was tearing through the crowd, slaughtering helpless people like simple cattle. So far, Leonard had been pretty lucky, blocking the vicious attacks with his heavy shield. But luck runs out. The beast soon locked onto his next prey. He wanted the blood of the one man who had not yet been cut. Stepping closer, the monster grinned and began slamming against the heavy shield. The force was immense, literally crushing the shield right into his face. Playing with his food gave this sick beast some twisted, unthinkable pleasure. He wanted to savor this torment, but his twisted game was suddenly cut short. Gunther finally lunged forward, striking the beast directly with his brand new arm. The vampire clearly did not expect anyone left on the wall to fight back. Leonard gasped in shock, reminding the knight that his recharge was not finished yet. He was supposed to stay hidden, instead of jumping into danger so early. Watching their champion fight with only one working arm left, Rene completely speechless. Ariel stood frozen, realizing how incredibly hard it would be to pierce the monster's heart. Gunther had already pushed past his limits, and his energy was almost entirely spent. She could not even tell if he had enough life force to survive this. But then the knight did the absolute unthinkable. The knight changed the battlefield entirely, physically shoving the beast off the high wall. He roared that it was time for the third act of their little play. Gripping the monster in a tight hold, Gunther dove straight into the raging sea. He did this knowing full well that neither of them would ever return from the dark depths. A massive splash echoed as the cold water swallowed both struggling bodies whole. They kept tearing at each other as they sank deeper. Gunther once wondered if a dead man could still feel the scalding ocean cold. As it turned out, he definitely could, though everything felt slightly numb now. Still, he refused to stop fighting, drowning while knowing he won would be enough. For the first time in this grueling fight, he actually landed a solid blow. Gunther smiled beneath the water, realizing he might actually pull this off. The beast is completely helpless underwater, as Gunther grips its flesh. He realizes there is only one option left: he must reach its heart. But the creature thrashes violently. It will not go down easily. A fierce, swirling underwater maelstrom begins to whip around their thrashing bodies. Pure chaos, our hero fails to block a sudden, vicious sword strike. The blade slices directly into his hand, marking a small victory. The monster laughs. That vile smile makes Gunther absolutely furious. He wants to rip its mouth open as they plunge deeper. Sinking rapidly, the dark seafloor looms closer and closer. It is a brutal blow. Gunther actually loses his arm in this clash. He is severely weakened and angry, but he absolutely refuses to stop. The warrior keeps clawing at the monster's body, aiming for the heart. But right now, the warrior is only taking blow after heavy blow. The enemy's sharp dagger finally pierces his armor, wounding him deeply. Most believe the dead cannot feel pain, but Gunther would strongly disagree right now. The agony is unbearable. Thick blood clouds the water. He is completely blinded, yet he feels the blade twisting inside him. It tears his wound wider as a bright red shape emerges. The glowing red body floats toward the surface, wearing a sinister smile. Drowning in blood, Gunther can only scream in absolute desperation. He desperately tries to pursue, but stopping his escaping foe is impossible. With his severed arm, trying to grab anyone is an impossible task. So the warrior uses his teeth, biting deep into the vampire's limb. Jaws clamping down, he frantically gnaws like a wild beast. Ripping flesh away, he keeps the monster firmly trapped in the depths. A massive, jagged hole is torn open, completely exposing the monster's beating heart. Realizing he is now in extreme danger, the vampire panics instantly. He swings his blade wildly in defense, but nothing can stop our hero. Pressing forward, the warrior desperately tries to bite into that heart. Right at that desperate moment, a memory of kind violet eyes flashes before him. They belonged to an elderly woman who once saved his life. She remembered a forgotten place, a dark void shunned by all. A toxic, rotting cesspool where absolutely no flies could ever hope to survive. Among the stench and ruin, she found a dying baby boy. The child barely had the strength to let out a cry. It was a weak, desperate sound, slowly squeezed from his fading body. A final, desperate cry for help, and miraculously, she actually heard it. Staring at the innocent baby buried under garbage, she wondered. No soul brought into this world should ever suffer such a fate. She wondered what the concept of life even meant to a child crying so persistently. Why did he struggle so desperately just to breathe in this dark, toxic dump? Years later, she finally understood the answer to her own question. The truth became clear as she looked at her grown boy standing proudly before her. Covered in the blood of defeated enemies, he was heavily beaten. Gunther was exhausted, unable to comprehend the warmth in her eyes. Clutching his face, she laughed hysterically. Revenge was his only purpose. Revenge, the realization hit like a truck. Yes, she was totally right. Nobody wanted him born, nobody wanted him alive, yet back then things changed. Gunther had screamed for pitiful salvation with his last remaining bit of strength. Now he had to fight until the end, he had to survive. His master believed she possessed the ultimate authority to dictate his whole life. This was his destiny. Humiliating his parents and the world was the ultimate payback. The harsh truth pierced him deeply as he surveyed the ruined, bloody field. He looked at the defeated enemies scattered everywhere. Smiling coldly, he stood tall. Fighting until everyone else lay dead was indeed the finest revenge of all. She smiled warmly. If her pupil truly understood, the next step was ready. It was time to prepare for their next bloody grand theatrical performance. The world needed to see his true value. Gunther accepted his fate. He would master any challenge, even the ones that seemed completely and utterly impossible. Not long after, guards found his severed head nailed to the shore. Separated from his body, he had somehow managed to swim ashore. His condition was pitiful. Still, he survived. It could have been much worse. The people rejoiced. Their greatest weapon had endured, keeping the city perfectly safe. But Ariel wept. She hated seeing Gunther suffer through such a brutal nightmare. Leonard rushed out to meet them, screaming that they needed to rebuild him. The warriors' combat was not over yet. They had to act immediately. Even in this mangled, lifeless state, the corpse knight realized the defender was right. Rene saw his prized creation. The alchemist froze in pure, unadulterated shock. First, they needed to recharge his head. The deep-sea adventure had drained everything. There was zero power left. Gunther desperately tried to voice some words. He failed. His broken neck could not produce a single sound. All he could manage was a silent, empty gape of his jaw, nothing more. Frustration lined his face. Ariel noticed his silent, agonizing struggle immediately. Without a body, talking was impossible. She gently begged him to be calm. She promised to fix him, but Gunther was furious and refused to wait. Rene had to intervene. The alchemist barked orders, demanding he stop thrashing. After several grueling, tense hours of hard labor, the warrior's frame was completely restored. He stretched his reconstructed limbs, whispering that he truly thought he was dead. His momentary relief vanished instantly. Leonard shattered the peace with terrible news. But get this, Leonard warned that the high-level vampire survived. This news enraged Gunther. He had personally ripped the beast's chest open. He vividly remembered biting its heart out. He knew the devil died. But Leonard was highly skeptical. Near the knight's severed head, they found footprints. The tracks led along the coast. The commander believed they were fresh. They belonged to the vampire. Following them, the soldiers made a discovery. A hidden wagon sat nearby. It was the creature's secret refuge. The defenders knew the monster could never survive the blazing morning sun. They decided to lie in wait for Gunther to join the ambush. But our hero remained deeply unconvinced. The memories in his mind were clear. He had completely destroyed that vile beast. There was simply no way it survived the assault. Had torn into his enemy's heart. Everyone desperately wanted to believe it. But Leonard still insisted that the corpse knight inspect the wagon. And he needed to do it before night fell. Gunther knew it was necessary. To keep everyone safe, he reluctantly agreed even though he hated having. His own words doubted like this when the band of warriors reached the suspicious carriage. The knight realized the others had not been exaggerating. Because the entire scene looked deeply unsettling, a thorough check was definitely needed. Even if he felt completely sure he had already ripped out the vampire's black heart, steel-nerved and focused, Gunther marched straight toward the ominous wooden cabin. As he crept closer, he noticed that the wheel tracks surrounding it were still fresh. It looked exactly like a dark vampire's secret hideout. Every single window was heavily boarded up, blocking all sunlight. Gunther realized that if the creature was indeed resting inside, the bright daytime setting favored him. If properly angered, the beast might just smash the carriage apart itself. Complete silence hung in the air, but don't get fooled. There was no guard because lesser vampires likely protected this perimeter. Approaching the door, the veteran warrior paused. Bitter memories of how he had almost drowned suddenly flashed back. He shook the dark thoughts off and kicked the door open, flooding the interior with sunlight. Peering inside, Gunther saw nothing. Total stillness. Not a single trace of life was anywhere to be found. But suddenly, two glowing red eyes flared up from the absolute darkness, accompanied by a chilling, familiar whisper. Then, the massive door slammed shut with a heavy thud, locking him inside. With the horrific beast, Gunther felt zero fear, ready to settle this grudge once and for all. In the pitch-black room, tracking the erratic movements of the creature was incredibly tough, but his combat experience allowed him to deflect the incoming strike. It was a brutal struggle, because the creature moved with terrifying speed in the pitch-black room. Finally, the seasoned warrior managed to throw the first dwarf outside. Just as he prepared to throw out the second dwarf, he was suddenly stopped, frozen in his tracks by a sharp, desperate cry begging him to stop. The rest of the dwarves crawled out, slowly. They accused him of murdering their king. Looking down at these miserable souls with a heavy frown, Gunther asked if killing the king even mattered when all his followers instantly became weak. A fragile dwarf limped forward and explained they couldn't fight or even stand because they were all cast-offs with broken, mangled bodies. Seeing the confusion on the knight's face, the creature quietly added that they were just useless, defective rejects. But even so, he announced that the final act of their show must go on. Gunther found this incredibly twisted. Coming from monsters who slaughtered humans without a second thought, the dwarf replied. They were bound by an ancient blood oath to wipe out humanity entirely. That blood oath was unbreakable. Slinking back into the darkness, the creature promised to unveil the ultimate grand finale. A small lantern flickered to life on. The dwarfs hunched back, signaling Gunther to follow. The creature stepped deeper into the absolute unknown, while that chilling whisper echoed deep within the cabin, making noise all around him. The constant, annoying chatter grated on his nerves. Besides, the dwarves were never meant to be real pigs. His guide whispered that they could never pass as human, so their master forced them into this role, the only way they could serve. This cruel talk made even Gunther feel uneasy. For a moment he actually pitied them, arriving at the Heavy red curtain, the dwarf grandly announced their newest and most absolute, stunning piece of merchandise. Right behind that fabric stood the very nightmare that Gunther believed he had slain. Evelina herself stared straight back at her. Unexpected visitor, a sudden burning fury flared up deep inside the night, hotter and hotter with every single passing second. Yet the vampire queen just stared at him calmly and in some softly, as if she already knew exactly how this entire reunion would play out. After then Gunther noticed it. Incredibly bizarre, this monster was not giving off even a trace of bloodlust, stretching like a sleepy cat. Evelina purred that with a guest present, she was not about to violently tear his throat out. The corpse knight demanded to know how she was still breathing. He distinctly remembered tearing her beating heart straight out of her chest with his bare teeth. Dismissively waving her hand, she lightly told him that he only devoured a small fraction of it. Unless a heart is completely obliterated, vampires simply will not die. But she added that a shattered heart comes with it. Bloodsuckers lose their ultimate weapon. They can no longer control the blood, since every drop of their remaining magic goes directly into keeping the damaged organ alive. Frowning, the knight scoffed. How generous of her to share such secrets, but if her story held any water, she and her entire pack would have turned to ash by now. So Gunther brushed off her words and lunged forward. After all, the only soul leaving this room alive would be him. As his lethal blade closed in, she remained unfazed. It was as if she knew this would happen and it care in the slightest. Meanwhile, just outside, Leonard and his soldiers waited, tense and hidden in the thick brush, praying for the night to return safely. One of the men whispered that Gunther had roughly 1 hour to finish the job. They agreed that if he did not appear within 40 minutes, they would storm in. The heavy silence was suddenly broken when a soldier quietly asked if these bloodthirsty vampires were once human. The commander frowned, confused. His meaning at first, the warrior explained that rumors used to whisper about lost children and helpless orphans vanishing from the dark city streets. While trying to find them, the guards stumbled upon a horrific, hidden chamber deep inside a pitch-black dungeon where no light ever reached. They found gruesome tools designed to crush human bones, along with heavy iron plates, but that was just the very tip of a deeply sickening iceberg. In one corner lay a massive, horrific pile of tiny, shattered skulls. Honestly, that is absolute nightmare fuel. The soldiers listened with sick fascination. Everyone desperately wanted to understand what this wretched place was. The warrior explained that it was basically a factory where the monsters manufactured what they called merchandise. From what he could gather, they twisted these innocent captives into bizarre creations for wealthy buyers. The guard had heard that the more deformed and tiny they were, the higher the price they brought. It was sickening to think that anyone would pay for such grotesque cruelty. But the guard heard that filthy rich merchants and greedy, powerful nobles were always buying. They were obsessed. Apparently, the size and ugliness of these goods determined person's status in society, just like how people in Valhalla bought beautiful clothes or jewelry. It was sickening. Anyone who heard this story could not wrap their heads around how people could buy children who had suffered such unthinkable torment. But when a person has absolutely everything, especially something so monstrously unique and rare, all inhibitions are completely gone and moral principles disappear. The warrior revealed he heard some of the survivors ended up in the circus and stayed there for the rest of their lives. He always assumed it was just a scary bedtime story, but if it was actually true, then that strange wagon held the tragic victims of this twisted trade. After hearing this awful tale, the men had only one question left: do the people behind such monstrosities even deserve to be saved? Leonard did not know what to say to that, since he simply could not defend anyone who committed such atrocities. Meanwhile, things were getting intense inside the dark wagon. Our hero fought his opponent with everything he had, determined to walk away as the winner. This time, Evelina tried to get under his skin, asking why he kept crushing her body and breaking her bones. She dodged as best she could, while reminding herself that this horrible pain would never stop. Even as she screamed and begged for death, she was completely ignored, so if she accidentally died, it would finally be a release. Evelina wondered why the man kept tormenting her instead of giving her long-awaited freedom. Closing her eyes, the vampire realized she had been told the truth about her business. Back then, when she visited the estate of a wealthy noble, he said something strange to her. Apparently, Evelina's grand act was outdated, and her performances had lost their value. it was incredibly painful and bitter for the vampire to hear, especially since she had worked so hard to make her show exciting for the audience. Now she had one last question for Gunther. She desperately wanted to know what was trendy right now and what could capture an audience's attention. She wanted her show to remain popular. Grinning, Gunther replied that the tale of a man surviving against all odds was what captured everyone's attention. Sighing, Ebelina whispered how that sounded like an incredibly lonely and painful performance. Suddenly, everyone, standing just a few meters from the wagon, heard a massive impact that caused part of the wooden wall to collapse. Inside the carriage, a fire blazed, devouring everything in sight. Gunther stepped right out of the flames completely unscathed. He walked calmly through the thick ash, flying straight into his face. Meanwhile, another part of the world was much quieter. At the walls, two guards discussed the news that two high-level vampires had already been slain in Valhalla. It was shocking news, making them assume the defenders of Valhalla had a secret weapon, as survivors were fleeing there in massive numbers for shelter. After a quick pause, one guard asked how many high-ranking vampires actually existed before those deaths in Valhalla. The other guard replied that there were only 8 such monsters in total. This meant only 6 of those apex predators were left alive in the entire world. The travelers were heading to Valhalla, following rumors of a severe supply shortage on the island. The citizens there were desperately running out of supplies, meaning they could potentially help them. However, this idea did not appeal to the other man, who refused to help those arrogant Valhallians. To them, their land had never been worth a single thing. He urged focusing on the strategic position of their own mainland. After all, they were completely surrounded by deep seas, on both sides, making survival much easier. Plus, they knew that vampires absolutely detested water. The guard claimed that those bloodsuckers were utterly terrified of water and would never go near it. His companion was just about to agree, but a sharp and incredibly loud sound cut him off. It sounded almost like a massive explosion in the distance. They instantly froze in place when the noise echoed again, staring out so intently across the vast sea that they completely failed to notice a rising shadow. The strange booming sound echoed several more times, and then something completely unbelievable began to happen. Countless tiny water droplets slowly began to rise from the surface, defying gravity completely. They floated silently in the air, but as bizarre as that was, it was nothing compared to the incredibly bizarre and terrifying sight the two guards were about to witness next. Meanwhile, things were far more peaceful over in Valhalla, aside from one major annoyance. Gunther was absolutely furious about being forced to wear an incredibly stiff ceremonial suit. Glaring at the ridiculous outfit, he grumbled, asking if this was truly the right time for dress-up. Ariel, looking stunning in her elegant dress, reminded him that they were celebrating a massive victory. Defeating 2 high-ranking vampires was an incredible achievement, and now some highly influential guests were arriving, making it absolutely necessary to look presentable, but our stubborn hero did not care about those guests at all. The danger was still real, with no time for such nonsense. Stepping quietly out of the shadows, Rene whispered that this woman was worth the temporary discomfort. After all, her immense influence was the sole reason why Valhalla was still standing to this very day. Because of that, he urged Gunther to watch his tongue and not say anything incredibly rude. A single wrong word could destroy their fragile alliance. To be completely honest, the heavy warrior felt slightly insulted that they expected him to cause a scene, but he stayed silent. Moments later, a magnificent carriage drawn by purebred horses arrived at the main city gates. Orders were immediately barked out to the citizens, commanding them to bow down in respect. The royal heiress of the pure bloodline had finally arrived. The crowd held their breath as the ornate carriage door swung open, revealing an incredibly elegant woman named Olivia Hound. Instantly, Rene, Ariel, and the rest of the crowd bowed their heads in deep reverence. Only Gunther remained standing completely tall, staring at the snobbish heiress with pure defiance. He silently wondered who this woman even was, and why he should bow to a complete stranger. Surprisingly, the queen seemed to appreciate his rebellious attitude, instead of growing angry. A faint, smug smile appeared on her lips. She rolled her eyes and turned directly to her royal butler, complaining that this place was incredibly dusty and smelled awful. Her servant quickly assured her that he would handle the issue immediately. Gunther scoffed, thinking, this royal lady must be completely insane to expect a bloody battlefield to look pristine. Although Rene was extremely annoyed by her arrogant behavior, he kept his mouth shut to avoid trouble. Fixing her sharp gaze directly onto the warrior, Olivia asked if this was really the legendary corpse knight. Her butler politely corrected her, stating that the giant before them was indeed Gunther. Frowning deeply, she began to inspect him closely, as if he were a fascinating insect. This intense scrutiny made Gunther feel incredibly uncomfortable, sending a wave of annoyance through him. It felt as though this arrogant woman did not even see him as a living, breathing human being. To her, he was just some soulless doll made by local creators. She looks away from him, casually explaining that the mighty warrior has to look so. Bizarre because he is technically already a dead man, this selfish queen. Does not even realize she said something so incredibly rude. Waving her hands, she loudly declares she traveled out to this rugged wilderness just to personally thank the legendary vampire killer. Her loyal follower immediately begins clapping, calling this an incredibly noble gesture that proves the queen is truly loyal to her own subjects. Olivia does not pay any attention to his cheap flattery. She is only disgusted by how terribly filthy the place is, quickly suggesting that they step inside the tall tower to speak. This ominous dark stone fortress is not a very welcoming place for a royal chat, but once they enter, seeing the post-battle destruction, Olivia Hound immediately wrinkles her nose and sighs that the air here is just as filthy. Her nervous assistant promises to punish whoever was in charge of cleaning the place, but Olivia claims she forgives them out of sheer mercy, knowing they are in the heat of battle. Finally, she decides it is time for business. Watch how she changes her tune, asking him what generous reward he expects for saving their city, but Ariel quickly speaks up instead of the silent warrior, telling Her Majesty they desperately need more resources and manpower. The researcher explains she knows that many prominent nobles, including the queen, had doubted the insane project to create a corpse knight, but their victory proves it works, thanks solely to Gunther. Humanity finally has a real shot at winning the war against these vampires. However, upgrading and sustaining his body requires heavy support, so if the queen agrees to back them fully, they can construct a direct path that will bring their long-awaited victory closer. But get this, Olivia is not impressed. She listens closely to Ariel's speech, but she is in no rush to answer. Just yet, she struggles to even remember Ariel's name, and with a thoroughly bored expression, she remarks that she never asked for the girl's opinion. Olivia claims she recognizes the heavy sacrifices of her people, but insists she cannot sponsor them because valuable funds are already incredibly tight. Pressing a hand over her heart, she claims that as the supreme ruler of Vahel, she is the ultimate defense, so she must oversee every single part of their war machine. Besides, the queen believes the assistance they currently provide is already more than generous. Pinching his eyes shut, our tired hero mutters under his breath that he has no clue what she is saying. Rene steps into the conversation, reminding her that everyone called his project a complete failure, so almost all the gold was actually spent on other weapons. This revelation shocks Gunther, since he honestly believed the rulers had real trust in Rene's research. Naturally, nobody would ever dare to openly speak their mind or express doubts to the queen and suggest that her royal view was wrong. Still, Ariel speaks up anyway, demanding she remember the simple fact that brave people had sacrificed their lives to build someone like Gunther. Her follower is completely outraged by this blunt disrespect, but Olivia quickly silences him, reminding the man that the Corpse Knight project remains strictly top secret. After all, even mentioning a dead soldier coming back to life to fight completely ruins the royal family's honor and spreads dangerous panic among the local citizens. Because of that, it is much safer for the human race and the creators themselves if this project is never officially recognized. And as a reward for everything, she deciding to reward Gunther for his service, Olivia offered him the title of Count in the fertile northern lands. Her advisor immediately cheered. It was perfect. He kept on babbling about how their future queen was wise, noble, and extremely generous. Olivia nodded along. If Gunther agreed, then this deal was sealed. Reaching out her delicate hand, she offered it to the rugged and decaying warrior. She offered her hand. She commanded him to kiss it and accept her terms. But the corpse knight coldly turned his back on her and flatly refused her deal. Rene tried to stop him. Too late. Gunther was not finished. He scoffed that this pampered princess had no real idea what they faced out there. She could not buy him off. It was insane that humanity's fate was in the hands of a completely brainless girl who somehow got herself crowned as their queen. In his mind, they had zero chance of surviving like this, unless they completely changed how they defended the city against those monsters. His words cut deep. Shocked by his pure nerve, Ariel immediately snapped at the man. Rene scrambled to apologize for him, claiming the rough knight simply did not know any better. But no amount of excuses could cool the rage boiling in Olivia. She was furious. How dare a disgusting walking corpse talk down to the future queen like that? He called her brainless, but before she could unleash her full fury, something stopped her. Guards suddenly burst into the royal chamber, throwing the doors wide open. They gasped out a nightmare was coming. Leonard's trembling scout could barely stand up from sheer, overwhelming panic. The wall commander reported that massive creatures were charging toward the gates. They were heading straight for Vagil. Outside, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the land. Something was very wrong. Peering through his telescope, Rene muttered in fear. He was furious. He demanded to know if Gunther realized his mistake. But Gunther did not care about pleasing Olivia at all. She needed to hear the truth. If he stayed silent, that arrogant girl would only lead them to ruin. Ariel quietly listened to him. She could not find a single flaw in his logic. Choosing to stay silent, she turned to their frightened guest instead. She demanded to know if the city of Toronto had really fallen so incredibly fast. The scout nodded. Those nightmarish beasts had leveled the entire city. According to his terrifying report, a few devastating strikes turned their beautiful home into complete ash. It was completely clear they were dealing with incredibly powerful monsters. But Gunther warned them all, they must not assume these nightmarish things are just typical vampires. Suddenly, Rene froze. He spotted a bizarre shape on the horizon. Pure terror gripped his chest. A massive, towering creature was slowly looming in the dark. It was gigantic. Even the distant mountains looked like tiny pebbles before it. Its massive eyes glowed with a hellish red fire, and then, only a moment later, a massive roar echoed, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. It trampled whole forests with absolute ease, as if the giant trees were just dry grass. Gunther had never faced this. How do you fight a massive giant? How do you even begin to defeat a monster that is 10 times your own size? He could not believe a titan like that was just another vampire. But Ariel reminded him that raw blood was the ultimate source of their enemy's power. Staring at the colossus, she whispered that she knew of this ability. High-ranking vampires can shape anything out of their own blood, leading her to believe. They were facing the steel titan Miranda. This was the exact same monster that shattered the capital walls and seized control, meaning their normal attacks would be useless. They stood no chance because the beast had skin as hard as solid steel. Ariel knew his reputation well since he was famous for tearing down major fortresses. Seeing him in person, though, was infinitely more terrifying, but that fame had upsides. Researchers had run countless experiments in the past to pinpoint the Titan's weak points. Hopeful at this news, Gunther quickly pressed her for the final results. All hope shattered instantly when Ariel admitted this massive creature actually has zero weaknesses. That is a total nightmare. No wonder our young hero was feeling absolutely terrified. Refusing to sit back and let the monster march right up to their gates, they rode out to meet him head-on. Naturally, Gunther took the leading position. His loyal companions flanked him, riding fast. During their journey, Ariel brought up more bad news. They had absolutely no clue where the Titan's heart was located. Worse, his skin was so impossibly thick that nothing could hope to pierce it. The young woman knew exactly what this grim reality meant for all of them. If the beast breached Vahel, the last true human stronghold would crumble to dust. After closely observing the Titan, Ariel deemed him the single greatest threat alive. He moved in total chaos, making his exact path incredibly difficult to track. When Gunther asked if they had any clues about where he was heading, Rene snapped back irritably, muttering that they were completely in the dark. Staring up at the dark sky, Ariel pointed out a vital detail. Their enemy was a high-ranking noble, meaning the sun was his ultimate weakness. The knight stared at her in disbelief, asking if such a massive monster actually hid from sunlight. She confirmed it, explaining that the Titan transforms once the sun rises. Keeping the wagon moving, the allies urged Gunther to use the daylight to their advantage. It was their only shot at winning. Hearing this, our young hero realized they were about to play a deadly game of hide and seek. Rene cut in, stating that although Miranda is fast, he probably won't reach Vahel today. They had exactly 1 day to prepare. Pointing at the map, he showed them where the beast was likely laying low, judging by his current path. He would be resting in a nearby ruined village if they failed to hunt him down there. He would definitely launch an attack on Vahel. By tomorrow, this meant their entire survival depended on a single, ruined village. Arriving at the destination, the team quickly discovered massive, fresh tracks. They were Miranda's footprints, ending abruptly right in the middle of town. But how could they locate him among 120 houses? Leonard decided his squad would search the south, while Gunther took the north. Looking over his thin line of troops, the commander sighed heavily. They desperately needed backup, as this mission was far too dangerous. He simply could not fathom why the Queen had sent so few men. A soldier explained that all remaining forces were reassigned to build defenses. Under the direct orders of the heir to the throne, hearing this ridiculous strategy and seeing Leonard's utter shock, Gunther burst out laughing. The annoyed commander snapped that regardless of politics, their hunt begins now. They start hunting their enemy. To find this vampire, they must split up and search everywhere. Within minutes, everyone disperses, scanning every single corner of this village. The search is brutal since nobody knows what form their enemy has taken. They check even the smallest nooks and crannies, thinking this vampire might be incredibly small. Tensely glancing at her watch, Ariel realizes they are rapidly running out of time, meaning their chances of saving the city are dwindling by the second. Gunther wastes no time either, checking every single house in his path. He is sure the Steel Titan was massive and powerful in life, so he focuses his search on the most spacious areas, moving toward a large door. The knight feels an overwhelming urge to see what lies behind it. Trusting his gut, he uses raw force to smash right through that door. Clearing a path inside, dawn is breaking and the first gentle rays are warming the earth. So far, their search has yielded absolutely nothing, and the enemy remains completely hidden. With only a few buildings left, Rene begins to panic. Terrified that their entire plan is doomed, hearing this worry, Ariel suggests the enemy might be hiding in a form they cannot even imagine. Sighing heavily, he notes that the sun is rising very soon. Meanwhile, things are getting pretty chaotic in other parts of the village. Gunther is tearing everything apart, furious that there is no sign of the elusive Titan. He hopes making a massive scene will finally lure the beast out. It seriously annoys him that he has cleared over 10 houses without encountering a single rat, let alone a vampire. Suddenly, the knight spots a brief flash of movement behind him. Turning around, he catches a massive shadow darting across the room. Without a second thought, he immediately rushes to give chase. Knowing this is definitely no coincidence, running at breakneck speed, he commands the creature to freeze because there is absolutely no escape. Sure enough, the shadow cornered itself with absolutely nowhere left to run. Gunther slowly approaches, trying to make out exactly what stands before him. For now, he can only see a massive, blurry silhouette huddling in the dark corner. Having never seen anything like this before, Gunther stares as hard as he can, but still cannot identify the bizarre beast cowering in the dark. Suddenly, the strange creature lets out a menacing growl and bares its deadly fangs. Later, as night wraps the land, bathed only in the glow of a full moon, Julius steps out into the night air to enjoy the quiet. Suddenly, a thick shadow approaches him. The dark mist shapeshifts into a fanged beast, whispering vital information directly into the vampire lord's ear, thanks to his loyal henchman. The pureblood vampire learns of the warrior, known as the Immortal Knight. He suspects this target was created in Valhalla. Growling nervously, the shadow reports that whispers about this mysterious place are spreading faster lately. The shadow emphasizes that this is virtually the final town Julius has left. Now, the powerful vampire begins to wonder if he made a massive mistake by not completely wiping Vahel off the map like all the other cities. After all, this place was special. It was where everything first began. The conflict had officially begun, and he intended to finish it right there. Julius knew that his time had come. The reviving shadow promised to reach out to Miranda. Nodding in approval, the vampire requested to get in touch with her immediately. He genuinely wanted to meet this legendary immortal knight face to face. Meanwhile, dawn arrived. As the full moon vanished, Rene felt quite heavy-hearted, convinced that their entire plan had completely failed. But suddenly, a chaotic commotion erupted directly behind him, sounding just like a fierce battle. He instantly figured that Gunther was responsible. It seemed his companion had found much better luck on his own search. Rene traced the loud racket to a nearby house where something highly unusual was taking place, he immediately demanded to know what was going on. Without saying a single word, Gunther emerged from the darkness hauling a massive dead bear on his shoulders. Patting the thick fur, he wondered aloud if a vampire could actually transform into a wild beast. Rene frowned, deeply doubting that such a powerful, high-ranking monster would ever take on such a lowly disguise. The poor creature had died for absolutely nothing. Seeing the lifeless beast, everyone felt a pang of pity. Ariel then pointed out that the sun would set in just an hour. Without wasting another second, Rene ordered a thorough house search. Once again, however, Gunther strongly disagreed with this careless approach. He argued they could not find a target they could not even identify. Besides, they were dealing with a lethal threat and needed a solid plan. Ariel backed him up, pointing out that their men were completely exhausted. Pushing themselves any further was far too dangerous. After hearing these concerns, Leonard firmly insisted they had to take action immediately, since time was incredibly short. He proposed burning every single building to the ground to finish this. Ariel hated the idea because these old dry wooden structures would ignite instantly. If the fire got out of hand, the entire forest could burn. But Leonard refused to budge. He would rather take action than sit around and wait for death. Rene was torn since he knew the danger of starting a massive forest fire, yet doing absolutely nothing felt just as bad. The endless debate was getting them nowhere, and he was completely over it. Rene decided to take matters into his own hands. He warned them that giving up now meant the war would soon reach Val, the city they had sworn to protect. Looking at his allies, he reminded them that he had only joined forces with them because he trusted their defensive strength. They had zero room for error and absolutely could not lose to vampires. Rene remembered a specific spot he had overlooked during the first sweep, so he decided to investigate. After telling the others, he rushed off back to the village. His frantic behavior seemed highly unusual, but Leonard knew. The captain was deeply anxious because his loved ones were currently in Valhalla. Leonard explained that Rene had a young daughter whom he cherished more than life itself. Gunther finally understood the captain's burning drive to defend their home. Nodding in agreement, Leonard announced he would also make another lap through the village. He urged the remaining fighters to stay sharp and stay on high alert. For any threat, night was falling fast, and a heavy tension settled over the entire village. Rene searched the quiet, abandoned buildings alone. He swore under his breath, scanning every single corner where the beast might hide. But his search came up completely empty, and when he looked up, the sky was changing. The clouds turned a dark, heavy gray, making him worry even more until a sudden pop sounded. That noise caught his attention. There was definitely something else hiding in this very room. Turning around was terrifying, but he had to. Cold sweat poured down his face. The captain saw absolutely nothing, just as Rene assumed it was his imagination. A bizarre chest caught his eye. It sat carelessly among some dusty old boxes. Yet looked surprisingly new. It stood out in sharp contrast to everything else around him. In this completely ruined, desolate village, suddenly another knock echoed from within. There was no mistake, that tapping was definitely coming from right inside the chest. Thick dust choked the air, and not a single speck of sunlight reached the ground. As pitch-black darkness fell, a hellish force suddenly erupted from the wooden chest, blowing the entire building to pieces. Rene was caught right in the blast's epicenter. He crashed hard into the dirt. Ariel immediately sprinted over to his side. With Gunther running hot on her heels, they had to pull him out right now, before he got pinned. Meanwhile, the monster slowly began to lift its massive head. Gunther swore, grumbling to himself, that he had predicted this exact kind of nightmare. Struggling to stand, Rene weakly blurted out that he had found their target. The creature they had been hunting for so long was right here. Rene sadly muttered that he had the chance to end it, but just could not do it. Hearing that, Gunther snapped. He yelled, demanding to know what could have stopped him from ending this deadly threat once and for all, but Rene looked completely shell-shocked. His pale face made it clear that whatever happened inside that room was truly horrifying. He explained how he had found a bizarre chest with something trapped inside. Thinking it was the monster, he opened it and froze in absolute horror. Inside was a little child. It was a vampire, but he simply could not kill it. That shocking revelation silenced the group, and they stared at one another in disbelief. What they heard made no sense. Now, looking up at this towering beast, it was impossible to believe it was ever an innocent child during the day. This colossal machine of absolute destruction did not look like a child at all. It felt like an elite, high-ranking adult, and it was ready to crush everything in its path, starting with the three of them standing right there. Waving its massive arms aggressively, the monstrous creature began tearing the village apart. The giant fist came crashing down, threatening to flatten Gunther and his comrades. The corpse knight reacted instantly, grabbing his friends just in the nick of time. Diving out of the way, Gunther yelled, asking in a panic for another plan. Rene shouted back that they had no strategy prepared for a titan like this. Furious, Gunther shoved the captain away. He had no time for useless excuses. He wanted the captain out of his way. Right now, they could only stand in the middle of the ruined village and watch as the massive Miranda strided away. Left alone with Ariel, the desperate warrior muttered, asking how they could defeat it. But Ariel quickly pointed out that the Titan's strength must be its heart. If they could pierce that organ, this giant monster would finally fall. Now they just had to find a way to pierce Miranda's thick, armored skin. Because taking this thing down was worth whatever risk it took. At any cost, the absolute horror paralyzing these soldiers is completely beyond words. They freeze right in their tracks, completely helpless before the massive Titan. Escape is entirely out of the question as Miranda prepares to stomp them flat. His heavy foot crushes them like minor nuisances, devoid of any human hesitation. It is effortless like stepping on bugs. His true target lies straight ahead. The glowing lights of the Bahal shimmer, practically pointing toward the city gates. To this towering monster, absolutely nothing in the world could stand in his way. Except he was wrong. Gunther suddenly arrives on the scene, ready to flip the script. Gunther pursues the giant immediately, searching for any way to halt the carnage. How do you even stop something that big? Suddenly, the beast senses an uninvited guest. Miranda glares back at the tiny speck following him. Gunther moves in a flash. Standing still means death, so the warrior executes a desperate, split-second plan. With zero room to run, pushing straight forward becomes his only real option. Gunther leaps straight onto the giant's leg, scrambling up the massive stone limb. Finding his footing, he unleashes a fury of punches directly into the stone skin. He tries to shatter the defense, but his bare knuckles can barely scratch it. Gunther keeps hammering away with everything he has, even though it feels completely useless. Miranda peers down at the tiny pest, mildly amused by this useless struggle. No one has ever dared to resist him before, but Gunther refuses to stop. He keeps striking, pouring so much raw violence into his fists that his bones scream. Suddenly, the sheer force of his own strike tears his entire arm right off. The severed limb flies away, yet Miranda's stone armor remains entirely untouched. Not even a single hairline fracture shows on his skin. This is bad. The futile attacks only serve to irritate the Titan, escalating his destructive rage. Gunther, the corpse knight, feels a cold dread. He has no way through. He has no idea how to reach the heart of this stone colossus, while he stands frozen. A massive stone hand is already sweeping down to wipe him from existence. Gunther barely springs away at the final millisecond, desperately avoiding the direct impact. A devastating shockwave from the crushing blow slams into him, sending him flying. He scrambles back as Miranda relentlessly targets him, determined to squash this bold challenger. Gunther is definitely not an optimist, but right now, he clings to one simple truth. Every living thing, no matter how godly, must have some kind of weakness. Maybe victory isn't completely impossible, just as hope starts to flicker. A massive stone palm sweeps in, completely blocking out the light. Somehow the corpse knight slips through the gap, defying all laws of physics. He acts like an annoying parasite, leaping wildly across the giant's stone flesh. No matter how hard the Titan swats, Gunther simply refuses to fall. Miranda thrashes and shakes, irritated by what feels like a minor itch. But then stone fingers snap shut. Miranda catches Gunther right by the leg. He lifts the warrior up, staring closely at this tiny, foolish creature. Anyone else would be praying for their soul, but Gunther isn't done yet. He finally spots the opening he's been desperately hunting for this entire time. It is the giant's eye. A single strike there will end this nightmare forever. The corpse knight realizes victory is within reach. He just needs one shot. He can win this, but the massive Titan still has one final trick. He had real strategy. He knew how to plan and realized he had to eliminate the annoying warrior. One single, brutal hit shattered Gunther's body, sending his remains flying. Up on the high wall, Queen Olivia Hound watched the steel Titan approach. Even the massive ocean could not slow him down because he marched straight through it like a shallow puddle. Honestly, the queen felt completely certain that no titan was truly invincible. She knew of plenty of times when weaker giant classes had been brought down by ordinary commoners. She was fully convinced they did not need the corpse knights help. When a servant approached, the proud queen asked about their preparations. Everything was ready. The servant replied that they were cleared for launch. Turning her head, she gazed upon the advanced new weapon that had cost a fortune. To Olivia, the massive weapon was incredibly beautiful. In her eyes, its glorious design perfectly symbolized the absolute power of noble royalty. It was humanity's greatest creation. Now, hundreds of giant arrows packed with destructive power stood ready for flight. The royal aide boasted that they would easily pierce right through the Titan's hide, leaving absolutely nothing behind, not even his core heart. Smiling arrogantly, the queen knew that the moment this beast fell, everyone would finally see that she was the ultimate ruler destined to lead humanity. Her deepest desire was to showcase the power of her family and prove she was never wrong. Raising her hand high, she signaled them to get ready. Her eyes locked onto the enemy, and Olivia could already picture his massive frame crashing into the deep water. Screaming, she ordered the launch. At her command, thousands of heavy projectiles flew straight toward the beast. Meanwhile, the surviving troops hiding deep within the thick forest gathered around the giant footprint left by Miranda. Looking at Gunther's remains, Captain Rene asked if this charred pile was truly all that remained of their warrior. The soldiers nodded sadly. Looking at the scorched armor, the captain could not bring himself to believe this was the end of their struggle to save humanity. Clutching a broken piece of armor, Rene muttered that if he had been more decisive and if he had not hesitated, this disaster would have been avoided. Tears streamed down his face as he softly apologized to the fallen Gunther. Ariel watched him completely speechless. She simply could not accept that the companion with whom she had shared her very life force was gone from this world. She became so lost in her grief that she did not notice a charred piece of flesh drop nearby. A sudden rumble echoed behind them, making everyone turn around to inspect the noise. Believe it or not, it was the rolling head of their supposedly dead warrior, Gunther, whom they were all currently mourning. The knight grumpily muttered that he was still alive, though not quite in one piece. There was instant relief in Ariel's eyes, but Rene asked with pure irritation if the knight had just been chilling in the tree, watching them cry all this time, hugging what was left of the warrior's head. The girl cried that she was incredibly glad he was still breathing. He had scared them half to death. It felt a bit odd to Gunther that the young woman had gotten so attached to him in such a brief time. Once everyone regrouped, the heavy carriage began to roll. They headed toward town while Rene, Ariel, and the battered Gunther talked endlessly. The dying knight claimed he finally found the giant monster's weak point. It was the eyes pierced them, and victory was theirs. Just speaking was pure torture, since his internal organs were completely shredded. Still, he managed to explain that Miranda's eyes lacked any protective skin. Straining to listen, Rene could barely make out the knight's faint words. Gunther's voice was fading fast, but Ariel caught the main idea. She believed their real target had to be the creature's core heart. Blinding him would only mess up his balance, not actually kill him. Yet the broken warrior kept insisting they had to strike Miranda's eyes. A deep gut feeling told him that this was their only real shot. When Rene finally understood, he gasped. Did Gunther want to crawl inside? Ariel stared in absolute shock, realizing that insane plan might actually work. If they pulled this off, they actually stood a fighting chance. The only real issue was figuring out how to reach its massive head. Suddenly, a deafening roar from the city gates cut their conversation short. Peering out of the carriage, they saw a massive wave of arrows flying. The moment the projectiles struck the Titan, everything erupted in blinding fire. The group immediately recognized it as the secret weapon funded by the Queen. It looked absolutely devastating, but would it actually stop a steel Titan? As the smoke and blinding light cleared, a massive shadow loomed through the mist. The giant silhouette stood tall amidst the rising spray of water. Miranda was completely unharmed, merely looking irritated by the splash. Word quickly reached the Queen that their ultimate weapon had failed. The steel Titan was still marching directly toward the capital. A worried advisor approached the Queen, asking if they should start Plan B. But Queen Olivia knew their backup plan was an absolute nightmare. Having her back against the wall like this completely shattered her composure. Outside, the Titan drew closer, each step causing a violent tremor. The ground shook beneath its feet as it reached the outer walls. Just then the carriage crossed the gates, and the group froze in terror. Rene panicked immediately, realizing the innocent citizens had nowhere left to run. He steeled his resolve, then a familiar voice called out to him. Rene whipped his head around, instantly recognizing that bright voice. Gunther suddenly remembered old stories about the captain's beloved daughter. Standing before them was a massive girl who instantly grabbed Rene. She hoisted her father off his feet with unbelievable strength. Tears welled in her blue eyes as she sobbed with pure joy. Rene frowned at Audrey, demanding to know why she was still here. He had strictly ordered her to flee the moment the giant crossed the sea. Audrey just grinned, asking who would repair the corpse knights if she left. Setting her father down, she told him not to worry about her safety. All she cared about was making sure her father made it out alive. She clenched her fists, reminding him that she was no longer a child. Audrey was incredibly strong now, and she was ready to prove it. Sure, Audrey was fully grown, but in Rene's eyes, she would always be his little girl. Amused by their little squabble, Gunther tried to speak. But no words came out, only strange, hollow, unintelligible sounds. Audrey's attention shifted immediately as she stared to see if this was really the legendary Gunther. She held out her hand, saying she had wanted to meet him for so long. But he could not return the gesture. His right arm was completely missing. Realizing her pretty awkward mistake, Audrey quickly pulled her hand back. She began stammering out a clumsy apology, but Ariel cut her off. No time for this, the dark-haired warrior demanded immediate action. She ordered Audrey to quickly assemble all the heavy mechanical parts. They had to fit the upgraded weapon into his frame, fast. It was their only shot at scaling the Titan. Audrey gasped in shock. The plan sounded completely insane. Still, she unpacked Gunther's torso. First, she had to connect the most vital pieces she had brought. The torso and arms were absolute priorities since they were irreplaceable. Suddenly, Rene noticed a chilling silence, as if the Titan had stopped. In an instant, the solid wall beside them exploded inward. Sharp stone fragments rained down on Rene. He did not even flinch. Forget the flying stone. Rene saw something that will absolutely break your heart. The collapsing wall had crushed Audrey, the one person he wanted to protect. All he could see was his little blonde girl lying there. It felt impossible for anyone to survive a devastating blow like that. Rene watched in horror. The very ground began to crumble away. Pieces slid into the deep ocean, but then he saw her move. Audrey was alive. A desperate surge of hope exploded in his chest. Without thinking, Rene leapt into the void to save his falling daughter. He lunged off the broken wall and barely caught her midair. Supporting both of their weights with one hand was nearly impossible. Still, Rene refused to let go, desperately begging her to hang on just a bit longer. But the cracked stone in his grip began to splinter and give way. Audrey knew her father's old, fragile body could not support them both. She pleaded with him to drop her and save Gunther's remaining metal torso instead. Rene roared back. His own child was worth infinitely more than some iron. With a final sickening crack, the crumbling stone ledge gave out entirely. And just when you think they are done for, a miracle happens. Gunther had clamped his teeth firmly onto Rene's arm to catch them. The corpse knight tried to speak, only muffled grunts came out. No matter how hard Rene listened, he could not understand a word. Still, he looked at the warrior and whispered a silent thank you. Meanwhile, the massive steel titan continued to smash everything in sight. Huge metallic hands and heavy feet crushed every structure to dust. Evacuation sirens wailed. Wajala officials tried to clear the island. Leonard screamed at the crowd, telling them to leave everything and run. They had to drop their bags and head straight for the outskirts. Shelter was waiting, but nobody knew how long the guards could hold out. The wall's defender turned around in irritation, but his anger evaporated in an instant. He realized the queen herself was standing right before him. Coughing nervously, Leonard admitted they would barely survive the night at this rate. It was clearly the exact opposite of what the queen wanted to hear. Her deepening frown said it all. She then demanded to know what the corpse knight was doing. The captain reported that according to their latest intel, Gunther and the others were preparing to face the steel titan with a different strategy, closing her eyes. The queen muttered she would observe his usefulness if he failed to deliver. Everyone on this isolated island would die since there was only one way out. But can you believe this woman? Olivia actually saw a bright side. if every citizen died then? There would be absolutely no one left to judge her actions. Watching the fleeing crowd, she grinned, realizing that once everyone was dead, they would no longer be around to gossip about her. Hearing this cold monologue, Leonard felt his entire world crumble. He refused to serve a queen who actively celebrated the death of her own people. Meanwhile, in Rene's workshop, operations were frantic. Everyone wanted to connect Gunther to his chassis as quickly as possible. Ariel warned him, once the setup was finished, the warrior needed to march straight to battle. He already knew that, of course. Inspecting his new greenish arm, he could tell this was a highly unusual weapon. Placing the limb right on Rene's head, Gunther realized that it clung surprisingly well. Glaring sternly at the giant, Ariel explained that this specific limb was modeled on a lizard to let him scale steep and slippery walls. Feeling that cold, slimy arm pressed against his skull, Rene glared at Gunther. Still, the engineer quietly admitted he was deeply grateful to the corpse knight. He never expected Gunther to rescue both him and his young daughter. Scowling at the engineer, the knight asked if they all assumed he did not care whether his allies lived or died. Shifting his gaze, Rene admitted he had only ever seen Gunther act out of pure self-interest. Besides, they knew nothing of his past. Rene wondered if the warrior once shared a happy life with someone before this brutal reality was forced upon him. This naive guess brought a wicked smirk to Gunther's face. He replied that he had never been happy, as even his own parents detested him. They were so pathetic they could not even end his life, opting to throw him away like trash. And when he grew up, things only got worse, since he spent his entire life surrounded by gladiators desperate to slaughter him for a taste of fame. The knight understood there was no warmth in companionship, only a never-ending line of killers waiting for their chance to bring him down. Yet, against all odds, he survived, cementing his reputation as an unstoppable champion. Even when the world wanted him dead, he dragged himself up and fought to his very last breath. That was why he firmly believed nothing on earth held more value than his sheer will to survive and conquer. Hearing this dark confession, Rene felt a deep pang of pity for the warrior who had never known a single moment of true peace. He desperately tried to explain to Gunther that there were things far more precious than merely breathing, but to a man who had nothing, those ideas were meaningless. Gunther's sharp eyes glared, burning directly into Rene. Nothing was going to change his mind. There was no point in talking anyway, since his assistant confirmed the connection was finally complete. At last, our hero could sever his link with Ariel and stand up. He was itching to start this clash with the Steel Titan, but just as he headed for the exit, Ariel stopped him. She went quiet for a moment, hesitating and struggling to find the right words. Finally, she softly told him she hoped to see him tomorrow. The undead knight went stiff, muttering that if this was some joke, it wasn't funny. He honestly couldn't comprehend the idea of someone actually waiting for him. Shaking off those useless thoughts, he stepped outside into a street of absolute, pure chaos. Locking in his focus, the dark warrior marched directly toward his enemy. Nearby, helpless survivors were cornered with a massive ravine behind them and a colossal steel titan blocking their escape. Looking up at the beast, they instantly knew their chances of survival were basically zero. With that realization, people, with tears streaming down their faces, started preparing for the end. Meanwhile, Miranda's eyes gleefully lit up at the sheer volume of fresh prey, but before he could savor the slaughter, he felt a strange tickle running straight up his leg. It was none other than Gunther, completely determined to put this monster down. A giant hand immediately tried to swat him away, but our unyielding hero just kept sprinting straight up. He nimbly slipped past every single strike, infuriating the massive beast, while never losing a single shred of momentum. Armed with his highly tenacious new hands, Gunther got a firm grip and scrambled rapidly up the Titan's massive torso, closing in on his target. In no time at all, our hero made it up to the waistline, halfway there. By climbing up the beast's blind spot, he managed to stay completely unseen, though the giant could definitely feel a persistent nuisance scaling his back. He was so close to the top when suddenly, a massive shadow loomed over him. The Titan's arm swiped down, successfully launching Gunther straight off his back. Flicked away like some annoying bug, the knight plummeted helplessly, a brutal impact awaited him, and watching from afar, Leonard assumed it was all over. But please, our hero has survived way worse than a simple drop from the sky. The only issue was his detached hands. Honestly, losing his limbs was becoming a habit. And Gunther was getting tired of it. Even so, he pushed himself up, filled with a burning desire to make this giant pay for the disrespect. Nearby survivors who witnessed this insane display simply couldn't believe their own eyes. No ordinary human could survive a fall like that. They had to wonder what kind of monster was fighting for them, but there was no time for answers. The corpse knight was already rushing back into danger, facing down another crushing stomp. Yet like clockwork, he slipped right past it. Talk about absolute consistency. Even amid the ruin and falling debris, our tireless hero never stopped charging forward. Step by painful step, he closed the distance, his remarkably tenacious hands ensured he wouldn't slip, locking his grip onto the Titan's rough hide. Naturally, Miranda kept swatting at his own body, desperate to dislodge the tiny invader. He strongly sensed that Gunther was up to no good, but dodging was getting harder. The massive vampire had already begun reading Gunther's patterns, making it feel almost effortless to predict his very next move. This actually helped the giant, making his attacks far cleaner and more precise. He finally pinpointed his target, slamming a massive fist right down on the knight. Under that crush of impact, the entire stone road shattered into dust. Survival seemed impossible, yet luck had not abandoned Gunther quite yet. Using those powerful new hands, he barely caught the edge of the giant fist. Clinging on to save his life, he peered down at the destruction below him. But beneath the rubble, a bizarre and unexpected sight caught his eye. A dark, bottomless dungeon lay, hidden directly under the broken street. How could such a massive labyrinth exist on this isolated island? But as Gunther stared in shock, the Titan shrugged him off easily, sending the corpse knight crashing hard onto the stone floor. He barely had time to look up before another fist began descending. As the Titan struck, the entire city of Bahul began to tremble. A violent tremor rippled through the island. Ariel watched in sheer terror, fearing this was the end. She might never again see the hero who had become her ultimate protector. But Gunther is not a man who dies easily, not by a long shot. Those custom hands Ariel crafted kept him anchored right in the heat of battle. Seeing his target still breathing, Miranda let out a deafening roar of rage. He was absolutely sick of dealing with this incredibly persistent little insect. But tearing down cities is what this giant does best. If Gunther did not stop him now, Bahul would become total rubble. It was time to execute the final, desperate phase of his plan. The target was simple, his glowing eyes, and he had to strike now. With a wild cry, Gunther vowed to tear this beast apart or die trying. Missing a few limbs would not stop him from scaling that massive back. He scrambled upward, relentless, refusing to stop for a single breath. Reaching the head, only a tiny distance separated him from his goal. He just needed a split-second distraction to leap directly onto the face. Just then, the steel titan realized something was scaling his neck. But his attention shifted immediately to a survivor down below. The giant prepared to crush the poor soul into dust without hesitation. Gunther knew this was the exact window of opportunity he needed. The beast was looking away, meaning it was finally time to strike. Gathering all his strength, he launched himself forward with insane speed. Clearing the giant head, his target was finally right in front of him. Two bright, burning eyes flared in the dark, showing him the exact target. Pulling his fist back, he aimed straight for that glowing weak spot. Miranda tried to swat the persistent knight away, but he was too slow. Gunther was now only inches away from delivering the ultimate strike. Long ago, there was a helpless boy who could never protect himself. When monsters attacked his brother, he could only watch in terror. The enemies were simply too massive, too overwhelming to ever defeat. But then a powerful high-ranking vampire named Julius appeared before him. He promised the young boy that he would never be weak again. Scared again, in the world they were going to build together, everything would change, keeping him safe from all the monsters he used to fear. They simply would not exist. The young boy loved this promise, especially since he was tired of hiding from bullies and suffering from their cruel hands. He willingly agreed to join Julius and create a new world, but the boy never suspected that in this brand new world, the ultimate nightmare would be himself. He would become the terrible tyrant who preys on the helpless, spreading dread wherever he walks, making everyone tremble. The once weak child had transformed into the beast he despised, now becoming the terror of young children who were just like he once was. This sudden realization halts the Titan in his tracks because he had Never actually wanted to torment the helpless, he only wanted vengeance, but right. Then Gunther pounces. He absolutely refuses to waste this perfect window of confusion. Nothing can stop him now as he pushes past all limits, so. Our fierce warrior finally reaches the giant's eye, driving his blade deep inside. The terrified children watching nearby reflect a horrific but incredibly welcome sight. The colossal steel titan, which had been a living nightmare to everyone in the land, is defeated, leaving its broken remains to flutter in the wind. Only one warrior was destined to survive this duel, and that was Gunther, severely battered by this brutal fight. He lost multiple limbs and can barely move at all. The townspeople stare at him with wide, shocked eyes, unable to comprehend how this grotesque warrior is still alive after sustaining such horrific, fatal wounds. They assume the creature before them is simply another horrible beast, except this one did not attack, choosing instead to destroy their giant tormentor, hobbling through the wreckage of the ruined city. Gunther ignores their stares until a soft voice calls out. A little girl cautiously creeps up behind him, asking if he was the legendary warrior who took down the giant. Frowning, the warrior gruffly confirms his identity, immediately turning to walk away. He is ready to leave but stops when the young girl softly thanks him. She mutters that she and her brother only managed to survive this nightmare because of him. If that metallic demon had lived, they would have been slaughtered. This heartfelt kindness is completely foreign to him, since people normally just use him for their own selfish gains. Reaching the city walls, Audrey greets him with enthusiastic shouts, praising his incredibly nimble movements as he danced through the air. She jokes that if our hero only had a slightly handsomer face, the city would build a massive monument. She even offers a hair transplant, but Rene pulls her back, saying she is overreacting. Meanwhile, the two bicker back and forth. Ariel gently places her hand on Gunther's shoulder, saying she is genuinely glad he survived. Gunther raises an eyebrow, questioning if she is sincere, since her blank expression has not changed a single bit. Ariel is temporarily speechless. She never expected the fierce corpse knight to pay attention to such minor details. As it turns out, he is extremely attentive, catching even the smallest shifts in other people's behavior. He opens his mouth to reply, but the door suddenly bursts open, abruptly cutting their quiet conversation. Short on the threshold stands the queen, ready to shatter their mystery. Scanning Gunther with a sharp, critical eye, she notes that he was badly. He was pretty bruised up, but the main thing was he had finally beaten the Titan. Olivia stated that luckily, most of her citizens were completely unharmed. All thanks to her strict evacuation orders, though the weapons, shops, and the defenses lay in ruins. Now it was time to assign blame. Responsible for this chaos, Olivia scanned the silent room, demanding to know if they knew what she meant, her eyes locking onto Captain Rene. He instantly realized this warning was meant for him. The queen pointed out that at the exact moment, he could have killed the vampire. He had hesitated instead. Hearing this, Audrey froze in absolute shock. Her father made a fatal error, a mistake carrying the death penalty. She fell to her knees before the queen, desperately begging for a pardon, crying out that although her father was a rugged mercenary, he had a very gentle heart that wouldn't let him kill anyone. Yet the queen's face remained totally cold, showing zero mercy. A pardon was impossible since someone had to pay. But then Gunther stepped in, saying that the more he looked at her face, the more he realized what an absolute nightmare this witch was unleashing on them. Her expression instantly twisted. The corpse knight agreed Rene had chickened out, argued it was fairer to punish the leader who lost so many soldiers by playing around. He openly questioned why the queen didn't face her own subjects like a true ruler and own up to her massive mistake. Frowning, Olivia was completely silent, because this knight had easily seen right through her plan to shift the blame from herself onto Rene. She was furious that a mere commoner was speaking to her this way in telling her she was acting out of line. But as they bickered, they completely missed the dark presence lurking in the corner, a mysterious figure hidden entirely within the thick shadows. Sensing danger, Gunther froze in place, whipping his head around. He couldn't believe he had missed the enemy's presence. Seriously, how did he miss that? Following his gaze, the queen's eyes went completely wide. Gunther instantly realized what this new threat was planning, so he instantly dashed to protect Olivia. Even if he wanted her to shut up, her death right now would be a massive disaster. The vampire struck with fury, filling the hall with dark power. He announced that he was the king's own brother, the absolute last of the royal bloodline, known forever as the tragic prince who never wore the crown, yet he still managed to slice off and grab Gunther's severed head, coldly stating why he had come. He came for the immortal knight, exactly what Julius wanted, and since Gunther couldn't protect anyone, the other knights desperately charged forward, but their strikes did absolutely nothing, and the vampire effortlessly slaughtered them all. The remaining prince warned the soldiers not to throw their lives away like fools. All he wanted was to take the immortal knight, keeping his solemn promise to Julius. He promised not to harm a single soul if they simply stayed out of his way. All he wanted was Gunther's severed head. He didn't think this knight was worth dying for. Hearing this, the surviving warriors nervously looked at each other. And honestly, who could blame them? Yet despite those doubts, the soldiers refused to back down, protecting their ultimate weapon. Then the queen stepped forward, her voice dripping with pure, bitter resentment. Whispers in her head warned that the vampire standing right in front of her had turned into a complete monster, yet once he was the man she called her uncle. Looking at his niece with a heavy frown, he said he was surprised that his family still chose to fight. With a mocking glint in his eyes, he asked if the